program, stick. So why don't we, go through, the attendance for the meeting?
No, also,
Yeah.
Steve Burke is one. Good, George Delaney.
Here.
Alex, you're here. Ron Bergstrom. Alan Rickfeld here.
Yep.
Amy Crowell is here. Gabriel is here. John Towns.
Here.
Mike Basto. I think I saw Seth. Seth's
Seth.
not, yeah, right there. Dale is here. Jim Abbott. Renee, oh, right there. Josh Reese. Commissioner Randall is not here today, but Sean is here. What is Sean? How about, Nick Corbin from PDP?
Yeah, Nate.
Sorry.
Yeah, well,
Eric, are you sitting in for Mike today?
I would use all of them, yeah, so he arrives. This,
Is Tyler or Tyler Solik here from season one? I don't see Allison. Jim Peters. Natalie Blaze. We have Dylan Fernandez. Again, you're here. Kid Steve Clinton. Oh, Steve Burke is just in. Right, Steve. Stephen couple seats. All right.
All right, well, we have a very full agenda, so, we're starting a little bit late. Item vision challenges, so, why don't we get into, we want approval of the draft business meeting minutes? Yeah.
Everyone received the draft minutes from Wayne earlier, so does anybody have any comments or corrections to the draft minutes? Yeah.
Commissioner Randall's name is spelled wrong. That was about it.
Wayne, maybe something like that. Yep. Anybody else? Take a motion to accept.
approval of minutes.
second,
Any objections to approve minutes? Seeing none, minutes for our approval. Thank you. As amended, sorry, thank you.
So we've got, next on the agenda is some work group updates. The first is the aquaculture license transfer, work group. I'll just give a little bit of an introduction on this one. This was one of the, key issues that came up in the Massachusetts Shellfish Initiative, which kind of was the energy behind formalizing this group. And it related to, a bill that was enacted, a bill that was proposed to the legislature, which was going to modify the language about the transfers of aquaculture permits between the holders and some recipients. And so, it was a kind of a third rail issue because some communities thought it was a terrible idea and some communities thought it was okay. And of course, the growers were kind of caught in the middle. I believe it was sponsored by the Mass Aquaculture Association. So what we wanted to do is, I'm shy of taking a position on whatever we propose, because of course that bill is no longer, active in the legislature. What we wanted to do was create an opportunity to compare and contrast how municipalities deal with this, because aquaculture is or shellfish, especially the species that are grown, are under town control. And so we wanted to create sort of an opportunity for towns to sort of look at, compare each other's through this venue, compare each municipality's approach to this. And especially for the up and coming towns, that aren't as mature in the processes of aquaculture. Obviously, the barnstables, the well fleets, the duck sprays, they're kind of the big dogs, they're well established and they've had to deal with this issue. You got some towns that just have a few grants as it is now, and they have maybe haven't even had to deal with this. So our objective was to provide that opportunity to look at this. And we did a survey about 2 or 3 years ago. And that survey was to the town officials, all about what their rules or policies were concerning this. And I believe Alex Boeri worked on that. So to today's report is going to be from Josh about your group's conversations on that.
Sure, keep it quick report, and thank you to Wayne for these notes, Wayne and Alex. So yeah, the members of this group again are Amy Proto, Bill Doyle, Alex Hay, Dale Levitt, Ron Bergstrom, and myself. So we had a pretty recent meeting, early November, and the group decided to sort of formalize work this fall around 2 items in our overall work plan. And that is expanding the survey that was done of municipalities to other stakeholders and, specifically industry, and get their perspective on specifically the aquaculture license transfer issue. And then the second item would be to further develop a white paper on best practices that can be used to guide stakeholders on the topic of aquaculture license transfer. So further at that meeting, we reviewed a list of potential questions for other stakeholders. So this was a list generated by the members of the work group after our last meeting, list of topical areas that the subcommittee members wanted more information on or wanted specifically industry input on. They were very geared towards industry. So we reviewed those questions and started the process of putting them into a more formalized question format that could go into a survey. And been working with Alex and Wayne on that to sort of put it in a better format that can then go back to the subcommittee group to review as more formalized questions for industry. So we chose to focus on current growers as stakeholders to gather more information on. There is interest in gathering input from other growers or other stakeholders, but require a lot more effort. So right now the focus is on growers and industry input. And then Alex thought that DMF could submit this survey through permit renewal applications at the end of the year for 2026. We also reviewed the outline of a white paper as drafted by Alex. So we looked at that and reached some consensus on the best approach to develop that white paper. We're very much calling this best practices and being very careful with that language, as we don't want to be prescriptive to towns. We understand there's nuance between different towns and how they want to manage this issue, but also want to allow the opportunity, like Dan said, for towns to learn from other towns who have been through the process a little bit longer, different lessons to be learned there, and best practices developed out of those lessons learned. So yeah, if there's interest in incorporating this grower survey into the overall white paper. And then, future meetings are going to focus on just gathering input of industry and incorporating that into a white paper of best practice. So that is what I have for notes. If anybody else on the subcommittee would like to provide input, go right ahead.
I would recommend working with our statistics team, because we just recently sent a survey to all coastal lobster fishermen. And we were able to do it with a QR code and mostly electronic submittals with an option for paper version,
Yeah.
but it was pretty slick. And then we he punched the data, and then we entered it. We were able to create a dashboard and filter the data based on whatever criteria. But I think that's a pretty good model. So that would work. Right?
Yeah.
So that's definitely something we can do. And it wouldn't necessarily have to be tied to the renewals. we wouldn't want to hold up the renewals because it's something we can do separately, but near about the same time. So,
Yeah, we talked about methods and having multiple methods.
yeah,
Uh,
great, thanks. All right. Moving on, next on the agenda is the Shellfish Hatchery work group. Again, by way of background, we identified, and I think this group identified sort of some limitations within the Commonwealth on seed supply, and wondering if this group could maybe take a position and maybe even make recommendations to the legislature or the administration for new investment. And so we created this work group specifically for this place.
So the Hatchery Working Group is comprised of Dale, Anderson, Josh, Seth Garfield, and Beach, John, Steve Kirk, support from Gabe and Wayne on DMF. We had our last meeting about a week and a half ago and touched on a few points that we're going to be working on going forward. The first being a seed handling training initiative for when growers get their seed post-delivery. Kind of discussing what existing training materials we have between Dale's class, East Coast Shellfish growers, and how to incorporate those going forward to give people some help with how to handle their seed. We thought about making a video that could either be longer form or sliced into smaller bits, kind of depending on where a farmer is, and looking at both short-term and long-term husbandry through the first winter. So really that crucial time of not killing your seed those first few months. Our goal right now is to work on a plan over the winter about kind of what should be included in that video and outreach, and then shoot some video in the spring when seed is being shipped, and then kind of get that video out to help growers maximize the health of their seed while it's going out. We're also going to look into surveying other state shellfish programs on issues facing the seed sector. Our goal is to have that for the next meeting, just get a sense of what our fellow neighbors are also having issues with. I do want to say from what we've heard, it doesn't sound like too many hatcheries have issues with seed this year, which is great news. It doesn't mean we're going to stop working on this though, because not always going to be that way. Wayne also presented on the DMF grower database, similarly to the lobster one, as to how we can use it to kind of inform seed and hatchery needs. And how we can break down that data into seed purchases, survival data, and the grower's role for people who serve as seed intermediaries. We found that there's going to be a lot of good uses for that data, especially for hatcheries and demand planning. And we're going to try and go back 5 to 10 years to inform and kind of project industry needs. And I think that will help us think about what sort of programs we need going forward and support for hatcheries. And finally, we discussed the new restoration programs that are in the works and how that might impact seed demand. The primary demand is going to be for spat on shell, and secondarily to larger oysters sourced from growers. Rhode Island has a really good model for this. And we also talked about how genetics is going to be a big part of that conversation with the spat on shell going forward. So we have our work cut out for us over the winter to help make the seed as viable as possible for farmers, and we'll keep thinking about ways that we can support hatcheries and seed supply in the state.
Question, in the state, we have 3 producers, we have the vineyard. And Ward Aquifer.
And the award, yeah, sorry. That's right. No, she,
Oh, yeah.
she's gonna say more, yes.
All right. Any questions for Claude? Okay. We want to go to the wastewater treatment plant model peer review next. And then we'll do the shellfish habitat restoration program next What the green for. So wastewater treatment plant model peer review, that's Matt. That's here. Yeah.
Great. I can manage minutes.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matt Charette. I'm the director of the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution Sea Grant Program.
Can I even on the piano just so you can see it?
And I'm here to talk about a review that we did of the FVCOM modeling study used to assess the wastewater dilution zones near shellfish growing areas. The purpose of this review was to strengthen confidence in the modeling that's used for shellfish classification decisions, and the scope of the review focused on the Buzzards Bay and North and South River areas. So why did we undertake this effort? So it started off with the FDA mandating that the DMF better justify their classification zones around these wastewater treatment plant discharges. And so DMF contracted with Professor Chen at UMass Dartmouth to undertake a modeling study using this FVCOM model to estimate wastewater dilution zones in these areas. And the model results led to a reclassification and in some cases downgrading of shellfish areas, which impacted farms and harvesters. And so we were hearing from our constituents in the industry and communities that there was a real need to just have a look at this model and understand if it was based on sound science. In terms of the review process, we worked with 3 independent technical experts. These were all PhD level scientists with experience in the FBCOM type modeling work. They were all outside of Massachusetts, and none of them had any sort of professional conflicts of interest or relationship with Professor Chen, who carried out the modeling. They reviewed the 2 FVCOM reports that Professor Chen provided to the state. And they were also given some other information that Professor Chen had used to undertake the study as a part of their review. After we received those reviews back, we provided those to the DMF and Dr. Chen, and they were given the opportunity to provide a written response to those reviews. And then we had a public comment period that took place at the very end. And from that, we heard back from 7 individuals and or NGOs and municipalities. In terms of the key findings of the report, the reviewers were unanimous in that the FVCOM model is a robust and appropriate modeling framework for this purpose, and that the model team is highly qualified and technically sound. However, they did recommend several improvements. The first one was to expand validation of the model. For example, look at circulation pathways, temperature and salinity data, compare that with what the model output was showing. They also recommended that the model look more in terms of the uncertainty, both spatial and temporal variability. The model was run for just 1 year, 2021. And of course, we all know that there's variability from year to year that needs to be taken into account here. And then the last sort of major thing that came up amongst the reviews was to consider natural reduction or attenuation of contaminants through physical, chemical, or biological processes. When we heard back from DMF and Professor Chen generally agreed with all of the review findings and he was fully open to incorporating some of that feedback as funding permitted. DMF noted the resource constraints in carrying out the modeling work, and also, their job of balancing public health with industry impacts. They noted that the model is used to inform long-term classifications, not discrete closure events. And the conservative approach that they took aligns with the NSSP standards that assumes continuous exposure and persistent contaminants. The biological factors apply only to the short-term closures. And then I don't know if we'll have any updates on this, but DMF noted that there was an upcoming EPA dye study of the New Bedford wastewater treatment plant that might provide an additional opportunity to validate the model. In terms of the public comment summary, those that responded were sort of universal in pointing out the economic impact of the reclassification and how it's hurt the shellfish harvesters and farms, causing economic losses. And also pointed out that it limits future expansion of farms in these areas. They keyed on the data gaps that were brought up by the reviewers and requested more field validation dye studies, looking at currents and real world sampling of contaminants around the farms. And then there was strong support for the concept that we brought up in the report of establishing an advisory group to improve communication among DMF scientists and industry members. So in terms of the recommendations that we put forth in the report, there were 7 that we came up with based on the review. The first was to expand model validation, and we pointed out that that could be done with local data sets that already are in existence. Conduct dye studies. This is something that we're recommending to verify the model dilution results. The third was to assess uncertainty, look at model runs for additional years besides 2021, and actually quantify the variability to improve confidence in the model output. The fourth recommendation was to improve documentation, clarify model inputs, assumptions, and forcing data. Number 5 was to study the contaminant processes, evaluate how natural processes affect concentrations of some of these contaminants over time. Number 6 was to increase transparency, clearly define how models are informing these regulatory decisions. And then lastly, we recommended to create an advisory board that would include scientists, industry members, and regulators to guide future modeling efforts. And then I'll just conclude with some sort of overall takeaways. It's, DMF and UMass Dartmouth, I just really want to stress this. They're doing really commendable work under tight resource and time constraints in responding to some of these federal mandates. The independent review confirmed that the modeling framework is sound and scientifically appropriate, but could benefit from further validation efforts. And we hope that with additional state resources, DMF can implement some of these recommendations and build more confidence amongst the industry in making these modeling based decisions. And for those of you that haven't seen the report, the full report is available here at this website. You can also grab it off your phone by scanning the QR code there. And so with that, if there's time for questions, I'm happy to take in.
Thank you, Matt. I'd just like to say that it was your organization that funded this, so we appreciate that, especially in this time of sort of tight resources and tighter going forward. I think it'd be appropriate to go back to the previous slide
Mhm.
for those 7 recommendations. And Chrissy, do you want to address any of those
Sure.
in detail?
I can start with the top 2, expand model validation, so. That obviously makes sense, the more empirical data we can get to validate or refute model results. Will just, improve public confidence in the process. So toward that end, we've partnered with, some other UMass Dartmouth, faculty members, researchers. They got some blue economy funding to work toward getting some, environmental data and observations toward validating model results. That includes, some instrumentation in addition to, going out on a boat, collecting bottle samples, getting temperature salinity data so that we can just, have those observations toward that validation of model results. Just last week, I was contacted by the EPA, who said as far as they know, they're still targeting this spring to do the dye study. Of course, there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty with all things federal government right now. But I was optimistic about them reaching out. Those validation studies are gonna be a double-edged sword. Because, we have model results that suggest other areas should be closed, and if that dye study corroborates it, that's pretty much gonna be the end. As far as assess uncertainty, I think, as you mentioned, Dr. Chen is fully amenable to that, but it requires funding. We're not even sure we have the funding to continue for this coming year. We were hoping to move on to Upper Buzzards Bay, and there's just a very uncertain funding space right now. So if we had the funding, absolutely, we would absolutely, look at refining uncertainty by modeling additional years. Improved documentation, I think that's a Dr. Chen bullet. Study contaminant processes, so that's one where, for this process, it's kind of a moot point. Especially where we are pushing the envelope, so that the NSSP recommendation in the guidance is that we go 1,000 to 1, so for every gallon of discharge, no matter what the quality of that discharge is, they want 1,000 gallons of receiving water to dilute it. It also says you can go lesser with data, so we've been putting efforts into sampling the wastewater treatment plants. We've been getting the influent, the completely untreated stuff going to the plant. We've been sampling the pre-disinfection, so once it's gone through the process, but hasn't gone through either chlorination or the UV treatment for final disinfection. And then we've been testing the, final completely treated effluent. And we're finding that especially UV treated plants, they're very, very good at removing microbes, the viruses, the bacteria that we're concerned about. There is a floor in that, the expected dilution of the 320 to 1, because that 320 to 1 is a recommendation by the EPA, the CDC, FDA, for all the things that could potentially be in the effluent that the treatment process doesn't remove, doesn't test for. There are a whole suite of chemicals that we have no idea really what their human impact is, so they don't have standards. And so it's just this sort of precautionary area, and there is little stomach to allow harvest for direct human consumption in less than 320 to 1. I think a lot of you are familiar with the Northeast Shellfish Sanitation Association. It's our Northeast states that partner that are part of the National Shellfish Sanitation Program. Last year, we had our Nestor meeting in New York on Long Island, and I explicitly asked for this topic to talk about potentially allowing harvest for direct marketing in less than 320 to 1, and I, Wayne, Matt, others that were in the room, like, there was no stomach to even have that conversation. So we wouldn't have our sister shellfish regulatory agencies or regulatory authorities in our neighboring states even support us in a proposal to allow shellfish for direct marketing and direct human consumption in less than 320 to 1 dilution.
First, just a point on that,
Yeah.
for clarification, is it fair to say that in that particular case, with 320 to 1, it's really immaterial whether or not you tested and you came out negative or positive for harmful deleterious substance, or I should say negative for those substances or toxins or chemicals? Because really, this is a precautionary closure, and what FDA, their interpretation would be is, it's not whether it's there or not right now, it's whether or not that it could be there and you wouldn't know.
Exactly, because our waste streams are the open system. Anybody can introduce anything at any time. And so that's the most difficult thing for these communities and industry to really, swallow, because it's this precautionary measure. We could test it today, find nothing, but we would miss a potential contamination event, in the coming weeks, and it's impossible to test for everything all the time. So,
Yeah, and in fact, we met with FDA about this very topic and had lengthy discussions with them and really pushed the issue on testing, and they were really firm relative to them. This isn't really something that you can test on, and so it's really frustrating and not being able to test and demonstrate what's there, but there's a lot of uncertainty. One, with both, even if you did detect it, what there aren't any established health guidelines for limits on any of those toxins, and the amount of them, there's so many and they're so varied that possibly may be extraordinarily cost prohibitive, like literally thousands of dollars per day, or tens of thousands of dollars.
and I'm concerned about, even if we tried to go down that path and convince them, I mean, all they have to say is, okay, test for Campylobacter. Campylobacter is a pathogen that could potentially be in a waste stream, and, Amy can tell you, that's a road we don't wanna go down, because we think there's probably levels of Campylobacter in the environment at background levels, but the science hasn't caught up, so we don't know that that's okay, and right now, there is a 0 tolerance for Campylobacter. So we test positive, that's it. We're closing down, and then it's gonna beg, okay, well, where's that leading edge? Where's that leading edge? And so testing can be a slippery slope that ends in more closures rather than improving the closure situation.
Transparency.
Yep, so transparency, I mean, we've been to, we meet with these communities, I suppose. All we're doing is we're taking those, delineations of those, contours, right, the dilution contours. And we're using that coupled with our sampling of the plant to justify the smallest possible closure. We're essentially saying, okay, give us the average, contour of the 320 to 1, 1,000 to 1, and he's been doing it seasonally, so we'll get it in the spring, in the winter, in the summer. And, we're making our closure decisions based on what classification encompasses that 320 to 1 across the different seasonal averages. But in terms of increased transparency beyond, meeting with these towns multiple times, I mean, I suppose, we could spell it out, maybe, put it on a webpage. I'm not sure how much more we can do.
Right, and the advisory board, this one baffles me. I thought you were the advisory board. I thought this is the Shellfish Advisory Board, so, but Dale?
So here's my problem. I've worked on hydrodynamic models for 5 years down in Narragansett Bay. With some very well-known and experienced modelers. And after 5 years of trying to model. Particularly cohort level distributions in the bay. We still didn't have the model right. We tried to verify it and validate it using drifter studies, and we were finding very many inconsistencies between what the model was predicting and what the drones and the drifters were demonstrating. And so to take FDCOM, Dr. Chen's model, and to run it through basically one iteration, and then use that for establishing regulatory purposes is totally invalid in my mind. And I
Did you say invalid?
is invalid. You can't develop a model with 1 year of study. I understand the cost and the resource limitations. But I just can't accept using this as a tool for regulatory management. Without a hell of a lot more verification and validation of the model.
Okay,
And so, secondly, hydrodynamic modelers are very unique individuals. And they're working in a science that I have no understanding of how they come to the conclusions they have. It's very difficult to understand, it's very intensively mathematical. I know that because my son's a hydrodynamic modeler. And so I don't think that there's anybody qualified within the Division of Marine Fisheries to actually assess the validity of a model. And you're not gonna get information from Dr. Chen because you're paying him to generate it. So he has an automatic conflict. Everything that he generates, he's going to argue is supportable. Whereas the reality is, as you've seen from this review, that there are deficiencies in the model that need to be addressed. And so I would think that this concept as an advisory board needs to be taken a step further and to actually generate a committee or commission that would provide review, justification, and approval for the application of the model before it can be used for regulatory purposes. And I would say it has to be done for each individual location that's been modeled by Dr. Chen for anyone. And so that I'm prepared to make a motion that we establish a more intensive oversight of the application of models to regulatory shellfish regulation. And be happy to read that motion into the record.
so Dale, the statute that created this board specifically talks about providing advice to the director, creating a forum for communication, and creating a forum for others who aren't in the shellfish sort of chain of command to bring emerging issues. It is not within the Shellfish Advisory Panel to create a new entity that would have authority over the division's activities or the division's decisions.
So what's the solution?
Well, the solution of assessing uncertainty, model additional years. We can do that if we have the funds.
I mean, you've already taken this model and you've applied it to different systems and you've made fairly dramatic changes to the classification of those systems. You're using a model that has not been validated. You can't use that information for regulatory purposes. Can't do it. It's not possible that that data is usable without proper validation. End of story in my mind.
Well, yes, a couple of things, you know, one, certainly understand your hesitancy or your concern with the model, but from my point of view, this process right here, this peer review was directly to address that. Based on the results presented here in the report, we found that the modeling work done was appropriate for management.
I'm not saying the model is not an appropriate application, I'm saying it has to be properly developed and be applied.
Right, and so doing these, at the end of the day, Division of Fisheries has been cited by FDA for not having sufficient buffer zones around wastewater treatment plants. As you know, the model ordinance, that's a shall do. We have to have, we have to do those are mandated. So what we're left with is within the limitations of resources we have, there's several ways we can draw those. We can do a raw volumetric calculation of 1,000 to 1, draw a line. But or we could do a dye study, but has its limitations because that's one day, one point in time, you may get 4 or 5 days of information. So what we chose, so we had the ability to make the impact of those closures as minimal as possible, is using the state-of-the-art hydrodynamic model to come up with potential dilution ratios and buffer zone that would have the least amount of impact. We only have a limited number of tools and we have to act, so I'm not sure in this particular case, given that, you know, the model was peer reviewed, understand completely your points about in these recommendations. We're not disagreeing with the need to do validation and et cetera, but we don't have the luxury to just out the egg, and we're gonna wait 5 years till we have the resources to do validation of these models, and in the interim, we would be forced to justify some other method. A straight
So instead, you're just trying to use invalid data to justify your classification error.
You know, the alternative is a straight dilution without any other information of 1,000 to 1. It would be more impactful.
It's, I can't accept that. I mean, you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. I completely appreciate the efforts you're making to try to minimize the impact of these reclassifications. I'm with you 100% on that. But I just can't accept the fact that you're using a product that has not been proven to be valid. That, it's scientifically not correct to do that. Yeah, Josh.
So just to clarify, Bob, on what you said, I think, and Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, but reviewers and Dr. Chen himself said, you know, the tool is good. It's just the output currently could use a lot of improvement. And Dr. Chen, you know, generally agreed with that. So the goal is to make it better and more sound science. And improve upon it to be used for regulatory purposes. They all have a lot of hesitation on the regulatory purposes of the current output. And the tool is good, I think our model is good, it's just, it's not quite there in this application.
Any other comments?
So couldn't we have an advisory committee, just like we have with the shellfish hatcheries and the permit transfers within this group to answer and create an advisory committee that helps go through this process? And then make recommendations back to.
Sure, but everybody here is either paid by their government agency or is here on their own dime. like
Right, so
yourself.
we don't have the experience to do the modeling or understand the complexities of that, where.
I wouldn't have the resources to pay people to come in as outside experts, if that's what you're asking.
It's not that I'm asking, I'm just saying if we're gonna, you're right, I mean, we don't have that capacity here, but if that's the additional horsepower that we need to make sure that we're going through this appropriately, and make everybody feel better about it and make better decisions down the road. It's just an option. And then I just had a question on the dye study. In the last 10 or 15 years, is there any higher technology that's gonna make the dye study that hopefully happens in April any more accurate than dye studies that have been done in the past from same kind of method?
I don't think so. I don't necessarily think so unless there's some drone-based remote sensing technique, that I'm not aware of, but, I think the point about dye studies is ideally you'd have several of them and not just one that takes place in one season under certain conditions that exist during that season or that point in time.
A
So,
lot of that has to do with prevailing winds. And if you look at the output of Chen's model, as it animates, when it's animated, and you can see seasonally how things change. When you get into this time of year with the winds out of the west, that's completely different than what you get in the middle of summer with winds out of the south. So the beauty of that model, in fact, I was involved in those first conversations about how do we solve this South River problem in Situate? And so what we wound up doing was closing the area entirely until we could figure it out, because we didn't have a conditional management area. It went from prohibited area to just pull. So we talked to folks in Maine and said, this 1001 is gonna kill the North and South River. And the advice we got was, well, why don't you, that they had enlisted a Vermont professor who ran the VCOM model. And that gave much more, in her view of state of Maine, more precise depictions of the dilution and how it changed seasonally. And so that's when we knocked on Chen's door and said, hey, you wrote the model, can we hire you to run these analyses for us? And it was really interesting because the North-South River areas that we were talking about were all recreational, and they only wanted the fishery to be open in the late fall through the early spring. So we were able to isolate just the sort of the model outputs from that time of year, which was advantageous. But we were always suspicious about dye standards, because if you had a weather event in that week, that could be different than the weather event a week later, or the season later. So, that's the origin of this. And so here we are, I'll just be honest, you've got and that's earmarked in our budget with the UMass Dartmouth. And it's funded this year, but it was only funded 50% compared to last year, which means that if it's fully funded, we might have to reduce our operating budget by about $300,000, which could also affect Shellfish employees at some level. I don't even know yet. We're scrambling to try to find that money. I don't know what next year's budget is going to look like, because right now we have a hiring freeze, and the governor is looking to scale back state budgets, anticipating the challenges of the federal budget and those expected shortfalls. So I hope that we have China available to us in some capacity next fiscal year, but I can't guarantee it because of the budget situation. But aside from that, I think these are some interesting and useful recommendations. But Dale, your vision of creating a board that could overrule DMF's decisions or force DMF's hand on this stuff, not gonna happen.
So how are you going to validate the models? How are you going to sit there and look at Chen's model for New Bedford Harbor and say, yeah, that's a fairly accurate representation? And if you go back and look at the True Study, which is the Vermont FDCOM guy, he took FDCOM, applied it to the Royal River in Yarmouth. And then he took the dye study and he reconstructed the conditions under the dye study and applied it to the model, and then looked at how the dye distributions reflected by the model compared to the model distributions. And he found some inconsistencies.
Right.
But it was not bad. It was pretty good.
Rizzo, you want to speak to
We
that?
don't have that information.
So that's exactly where we're going with some of these funded.
Yes,
Funded.
and I 100% support that. But you can't apply the model for regulation until you get there.
But the thing is, we have to make classification decisions immediately. We're told they're not big enough. You do not have big enough prohibited areas around. So right now, we're using the best available science. And right now, the best available science is what that model outlines.
That's not the best science.
Well, and as far as it not being validated, Chen's modeling efforts have been validated 100 times over for different applications.
I
And
don't
even
disagree.
Even in Buzzards Bay, I don't know, I may have said this anecdote before, but years ago, we had a hunter that went out of Westport in the winter time to go duck hunting, and he never came back. And they couldn't find him, and the Coast Guard was looking for him, and then they went to Chen and said, Chen, if he went out here on this day, where would we find it? He said, look here, and after a week of looking, they found that body exactly where Dr. Chen said to look. You know, so that's why we were thinking, okay, well, this is somebody who is world renowned for his modeling efforts. This is gonna be an opportunity for us to get some, albeit it's model, I understand, I completely understand that a model can be like a black box. A model is only as good as the data you put in and what the drive, you know, what are the data driving the model out, but I totally get that. But in terms of us making those decisions, and especially if we're pushing the envelope to the 320, nobody else in the country is allowing harvest for direct marketing between 320 and 1,000. They're saying, okay, well, we're gonna call that restricted and we'll allow harvest for depuration. So for us to say, okay, we're not gonna listen to the FDA and 1,000 to 1, we're gonna go straight to 320 to 1. And we're saying, okay, we haven't looked at it in every single way, but we've modeled it in the spring, in the winter, under storm conditions, and so that's our best case right now for being able to justify the smaller dilution.
But you haven't demonstrated that that model's giving you good data.
We're,
That-
we're
that's-
working
that's my
toward getting
bottom-
some additional validation studies.
Which I support 100%, but until you get that to that point. You can't be using it to make regulation, you can't be using it to define classification areas.
So we need to move on this agenda item, but I just with Bondale, you know, at the end of the day, the EMF has to make a management decision. You may contend that it's not the best available scientific information. But the alternative is doing a straight raw 1,000 to 1 dilution ratio, the impacts of which would be far greater. We have to make a management decision. So I don't know what an alternative data source is. We're trying to use the most precise.
Are there any other states that are using hydrodynamic models for classifying areas? I haven't been able to find one.
Well, you mentioned Maine,
Excuse me,
Maine, the not, the.
they did it as an example, they don't use that routinely, do they?
No,
I mean, that was a research project that True did.
A lot of them are going straight to the 1,000 to 1, and they have larger closure areas.
That's the alternative.
You know.
That's what we're trying to prevent.
So how do you determine where the boundary is for 1,000 to 1? You're using the model now. Which. We have a chicken and an egg problem here.
We really do, like especially in Buzzards, right? It depends on the tide. So do we say, okay, well, if the tide's going this way, 1,000 to 1 is gonna be going east and 1,000 to 1. So now we're gonna get much more than 1,000 to 1 because there's uncertainty as to which direction that 1,000 to 1 is going. And so if we're erring on the side of public health, then we're making much larger closures because we have such uncertainty and not enough data. So, but kind of, like you said, it's chicken, egg, rock hard place. It's difficult decisions, and honestly, especially for the Buzzards Bay area, I'm worried that the dye study's gonna be worse.
See, I'm not. I think it's good.
But we'll find out the dice that's to come.
Yeah,
I know.
which is great.
Is that,
Quick question for you, Dan. You mentioned the budget. What is your budget cycle for your regular annual budget? So as an example, the Mass Aquaculture could go to bat through the political machine up there to help maintain that line item in regards to allowing you to have the funding
Yeah,
for what's
so
currently
it's-
there.
I mean, obviously, the fiscal year starts in July. The governor puts her budget together now, like in November. Then she sends it over to the House. The House takes that and modifies it over the winter, like February, March, and then in April, they debate it, they kick out a budget. And then, which means the governor's budget is now sort of, governor's budget is kind of a recommendation, but when the House passes their budget, then that that has like, not the force of law, but that's official. Then the Senate takes that budget and they either match it with, or they make amendments to it, when they reconcile it around June, and they send it to the governor. The governor usually signs it, hopefully by July 1. Typically it's a month late. But, now's the time to be talking to the administration and, or even some of your House and Senate, folks, about that, and I'd be happy to share with you what that language looks like, but I'm just, just a heads up that things are gonna get pretty tight next year, at least that's what we're being warned about the governor's budget.
Hey, Ken, can I ask you a question?
Sure,
Do you feel comfortable doing that yourself, or do you feel it would be more better if we did that?
absolutely, it's better, you're hearing, what our challenges are, have at it, it'd be great if you guys can.
Because you're in an awkward position asking for more
Oh,
money.
sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So we'll get the right language from you, and then Josh, just quickly, because it's semi-related to the whole buzzards bay issue. Obviously, there's several farmers that are contemplating folding up their tent because of the rules governing the buzzards bay and the closures, whether it's the CSO or the 1,000-to-1. And I don't know if in the permitting process or looking at all of that, what obligation does a town of Dartmouth, Westport, Fairhaven have to relocate a farm? Because that's, the farms are being closed because of this new law change, which is coming up on 2 years or whatever, that, that's having a significant financial impact on the industry. So I don't know if that's a whole nother topic on another day, but it's out there.
Yeah, I don't have a solid answer for that. I don't know if the state would have an answer for that, but.
So if there continues to be money in the budget to continue modeling, I would much rather see that money put into validating the existing models than to see you create new models for new locations. Because, there's still a lot of data that needs to be collected in order to validate the 3 models that you've already generated.
If I could just chime in, she would be a little. I'm State Representative Natalie Blair, everybody. I'm the chair of the Ag and Fisheries Committee. Now I have the honor of being here with you all, so thank you. But just wanted to follow up on the budgetary conversation. As you noted, the governor is pulling together H2 right now. We have a 2-year legislative cycle. So H1 is the first year budget, H2 is the second year budget. She does have to present that at the beginning of January, so if there were, if you wanted to participate in any sort of advocacy, certainly speaking with the administration right now, advocating for what that line item should and could be. There is a public process after the filing of that budget. We used to serve on Ways and Means. There are 8 hearings that are held throughout the entire Commonwealth, where the administration speaks to those budget recommendations, and they do take testimony from the public. So that's another opportunity to weigh in before it comes to the House. The House does have its first bite at the budget. Just want to emphasize that we're hearing what you're hearing in terms of, we just had to cut $800 million from our last budget in anticipation of what we're seeing come down from the feds. And we're trying to, pass additional supplemental budgets as we see what else is coming down from the federal government. So we are in very difficult budgetary times. I don't envy you at all in terms of the recommendations that you've had put forward to the governor and administration and finance. But I just want to flag, there are actions you can take now with the administration. There's a public participation process through these 8 public hearings, and then the House will be taking up its budget first in that timeline. It was just out on the Senate, and we'll go from there.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, good. So, Dale, your point, if you want to drop us a letter with your recommendations on that.
That's in the CBAT report. I could certainly.
The recommendations about not running more
Oh, okay.
Like if there's a town that has, a potential closure, and we wanted to run the model to keep that closure small, that's gonna be a decision we're gonna have
But
to.
so far, it hasn't kept any closure small.
Actually, it
Unless
has.
it says what-
North South
they
River
exist.
did. They would have lost the entire river, but the modeling showed that they were, because of the flow of the river and where the essentially like a mosquito ditch in the marsh where it was discharging, that the net flow was out, and so we were able to reopen the upper portion of the river in, the North River. So if it wasn't for the model, they would not have gotten any area back at all in the North South River.
Whereas we lost a significant amount of area around us.
Well, there's also a difference between volumes, right? And that's another thing too, is like we're even. The volumes coming out of New Bedford can reach close to 100 million gallons, and we modeled it to 26 million gallons.
It was 22.
So we used a average, which,
Yeah.
the FDA's recommendation is to use what the plant is permitted for, not necessarily maximum, but what the plant is permitted for, which is 76 million, which would be 3 times the impact. So
We're trying down. That's the
And
point.
I recognize that and I appreciate at least letting me yell at you.
All right. So noted. Next on the agenda is the Shellfish Habitat Restoration Program, and I think, Don Terrell.
Not everybody nice and calm.
And another jump in.
Okay, hi everyone. I participated on a previous meeting virtually, so this is my first time being here in person, so thanks for having me. I started on in February of this year, so I'm going on 8 months or so. And here to give an update on the oyster reef restoration work we're doing in the state. So just to give an overview, which I know you've probably heard this before, but just to refresh your memories. We're working on an NRCS funded partnership with TNC and the Cape Cod Conservation District to restore oyster reefs around the state.
Could you define NRCS?
The Natural Resources Conservation Service, it's a part of USDA. So it's hard to quantify, but we think we've lost somewhere around 85 to 99% of oyster reefs in New England, which is kind of surpasses the global trend. Oyster reefs are one of the most degraded coastal habitats in the world. And so we want to restore these habitats for several reasons, but really it's to restore ecological services. Those include harvest opportunity, creating habitat, filtering water, protecting shorelines, and removing nutrients from the water. And so I just want to highlight that this work the restoration is facilitated by farmers because it's funded by NRCS. So they're interested in kind of farmer conservation partnerships. So since my time here, one of the primary things that I worked on was creating this restoration suitability index model for the state. A lot of the restoration efforts in Massachusetts have been kind of disjointed. So we're really trying to come at this holistically and consider the whole state and make data-driven decisions and not sort of just convenience decisions. So what went into the model were some habitat parameters, some logistics parameters, and community resources parameters. For habitat, we looked at salinity, historic suitability, and water depth, and we considered more factors than that, but whether it was data inconsistency or availability or whatnot, those were the most surefire ones that we ended up with. For logistics, we looked at boat ramp proximity, and exclusionary uses, which, you know, it's like navigation channels, mooring fields, active shellfish beds, relay areas, et cetera. Community resources, we looked at shellfish management capacity and aquaculture partners. Shellfish management capacity was essentially just a measure of how many people in a town are working on shellfish management. Aquaculture partners was like a proximity-based parameter, because like I said before, if we don't have aquaculture partners, then we can't really do the NRCS model of restoration, which is what they funded us to do. So the point was to identify the most suitable areas, and we used shellfish classification areas as the base spatial unit. So obviously, I mean, some classification areas are like Cape Cod Bay, some are like someone's, you know, single mooring or something. So they range in size greatly, so, you know, there's some variability there, but the point is to kind of get us to like a water body or town level, and then go into the field and do site assessments and kind of further dig in and figure it out. I have the link here for the model. I don't know if this is gonna get, this presentation is gonna get distributed, but you would need to contact me if you want to scroll through it. I just have like a guest, password. It's the IT department, made me do it, but so, yeah, if you want to scroll around and drive around in it, you can, it's pretty straightforward. So, the next steps are partnering with interested municipalities. So far, we have a project looking like it's picking up speed in Westport. We've been in conversation with the towns of Yarmouth and Dennis for a project in Bass River. There was some initial interest for Wareham. And yeah, I mean, we're just kind of, you know, looking for municipalities to reach out if they're interested, and we're interested in expanding our efforts. We want to kind of distribute this work throughout the state. So in the places where we have identified potential projects, we're going to be going out and doing site assessments, looking at sediments, water quality, and more like localized use conflicts that weren't really captured in the model. And with that data, we want to identify and designate like, you know, permittable sites, and then start the design and permitting process. And while that's going on, we'll be reaching out to growers in that area, to try to get them to enroll in NRCS equip. And so basically growers get paid by NRCS to grow out seed to like post-market size, so like big spawner oysters, and then also work with hatcheries to get spout on shell set and then grown out on their site, and then have those spawner oysters and the spout on shell deployed to the restoration site. It seems like we're gonna kind of take care of culching the area. I mean, we'd like to leverage, you know, town recycling programs and their any kind of shell stock that they have. But yeah, the actual restoration is kind of facilitated through the growers. And so you can kind of look up like the NRCS equip program. If you type in the Rhode Island oyster initiative, it's a really good model, and that's what we're trying to implement here. It's a very spelled out thing. Growers sign a contract, and they get paid for all the work they do. So Wayne sort of suggested that I come up with some things to chew on for the advisory panel. So I thought these were 3 topics that warranted you know, just maybe some brainstorming or conversations or maybe just if advice from you all for us. So first, Mass DEP permits shell cultures, wetland fill. So we're looking at mandatory environmental impact reports for projects over 10 acres or within 1 mile of an environmental justice community. That second one is really the killer because that's most estuaries. And so it's a little bit, it's frustrating and kind of absurd that we would need to do a greater level of environmental review for restoring and improving coastal habitat closer to like an underserved community. You'd think that we would be rewarded for that, but instead we have to do more environmental review. I know that there are people thinking about this already, but just throwing it out there. The second one is oyster shell scarcity. I know Mass Oyster Project is trying to build up kind of statewide shell recycling programs. I know that individual towns do recycling programs. But it would be great to brainstorm how we can kind of all work together to you know, just standardize or build some kind of crosstalk between all the different recycling programs, or whether we need kind of a state level one or that type of thing. And then this third one, I'm really interested in, and would be looking for input on, which is what should we be thinking about in terms of, you know, introducing oysters to these water bodies? Should we be looking to use hatchery bred disease resistant strains, or should we be looking to, you know, kind of harvest some big adult oysters that exist in that water body that clearly have some kind of resistance to disease and what else is present, and use those as the brood stock? Should we be thinking about using brood stock from some other region or within this region, or, you know, there's a lot of ways to go about that. So I'd be interested in input on that. I think the next slide is, oh no, so yeah, here's just my contact information, and then my colleague Dan's contact information. And this was from MSOA. I left this down at the bottom. Stephanie works with TNC, and she's doing a survey at the municipal level to understand barriers to restoration, and she's having a hard time finding participants. So if you're a municipal employee or you know one who works with restoration or shellfish, it'd be awesome if you could help her. It's part of her dissertation. Yeah, so then the next slide's Wayne. So if anyone has questions or comments,
You wanna take it one at a time? You got those three issues.
sure.
Anybody wanna comment on number one, on the Mass DEP comment?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So the Gulch is wetland fill, that's an issue for 401 permits and under Mass DEP. And we're working on modifying the water quality cert regulations so that if you are filing under like an ecologic restoration limited project, which I think this work would probably qualify as, if you obtain an order of conditions, you don't need a water quality cert. So that would simplify that process. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but so the second issue is with MIPA. If you were just receiving an order of conditions and not a water quality cert, you might not have to go through MIPA, which might help that second point. But I believe MIPA is looking at changing their regulations right now. So maybe that might be interested in talking to them about that. If there is some provisions where there's a waiver for ecologic restoration projects.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that information. I know that shellfish habitat restoration is not included as a ecological restoration project.
Yeah.
I think it is being considered to be a limited project. I did, when I spoke with MIPA, they sort of pointed the finger at DEP, so. But, yeah.
Okay,
Do you have any kind of timeline on when those new regulations will be adopted?
It's hard because the water quality cert, the water quality cert regulations, they're under the Clean Water Act, so they have to apply with some federal rules too, so that makes changing them a little bit harder than other regulations, but it's currently being worked on right now. I don't have a specific timeline though.
Okay.
And what about Dale, do you-
I have additions I want to put on the list, so if you wanna go through the list first,
Sure, oyster shell scarcity, any thoughts on that? Statewide recycling programs. If not, we can, feel free to reach out.
Yeah.
to Sean.
so I will continue to sound the horn about disease reservoirs. And that should be consideration as you start looking at restoration sites and proximity to existing oyster ponds. So I think that really needs to be taken into consideration. And I have some data that will, so I'll cement that home, we can talk about it afterwards.
Okay.
Gail, are you implying you'd like a minimum distance between a,
Well, that's the problem. We don't know what a minimum distance is because particularly with dermal, it produces a flagellated zoospore that actually swims away. And we don't know how far that can actually transport away from a point source of a restoration site to possibly impact other. I will say, so the data I have is we've been looking at the Little Bay site in Fairhaven. And I've had some people do dermal testing on that site as well as my farm, which is probably about a mile away. That Little Bay site it was ridiculously high with dermal, both in terms of percent prevalence, but also in the intensity of the disease. Whereas my farm was on the low end of what we would expect by farm. So far, so good. But we just don't know what the effective distance is from a point source of dermal as to where it's gonna go. So it's something that you need to continue to think about. And the other point I wanna make is, we can encourage people to sign up for EQIP, but I've been on the list for 2 years and they keep running out of money. And last I heard, they weren't anticipating a whole lot of money coming through the federal pipeline for the next 3 years probably.
could you clarify what EQIP is?
EQIP is the Environmental Quality Incentive Program with NRCS. And so all of these restoration programs are where the farmers are involved, are done by registering through this EQIP. It's a series of voluntary conservation practices that they will then reimburse you for if you participate in them. So they have dollar amounts that are associated with things like recycling gear and doing water quality monitoring on your farm or disease monitoring on your farm. But the USDA EQIP funds have been really scarce the last 2 years, and they're probably gonna continue to be scarce for a few more.
I would add that this is a new conservation practice, 643. It has not been implemented in Massachusetts yet, so I don't know.
It's been in Rhode Island for years.
Yeah,
Right.
it funded hundreds of growers in Rhode Island, so I mean,
Yeah.
I can't speak to NRCS's funding capacity, but
Yeah, I
They've-
know, I've been bumped off the list twice now because they just ran out of money. And usually they go through 3 cycles in a year. This past year, they got through the first cycle, and that was it. They had to shut down the whole program. So it's sparse pickings right now.
All right, so if any of the members have any recommendations on those particular items, we'll have them reach out to you, Sean.
sounds great.
Okay. Do we want to take a short break? We're halfway through the meeting and folks can get a drink or whatever. Feedback. Any feedback?
Like to use the restroom.
Yeah. Right, Amy, thank you.
Unanimous, but
It's sure to make it wicked interesting.
It'll be very brief. Hello, everyone. I'm gonna kind of segue from Sean's presentation because the new restoration program was really a catalyst for the next update here is to update our shellfish planting guidelines. I think many of you are familiar with this document. We're now under the third iteration of it. And particularly with the growth of aquaculture in the Commonwealth and amongst the municipalities, these guidelines, I would say, are one of our #1 policy documents that's used. People follow this daily because there are so many rules about moving shellfish, purchasing seeds, importation from other states, and the like. And so we developed these guidelines back in 2011 for the first time, and now they're just in use day after day. However, in addition for the need for updating regularly, Sean's program and the restoration program really bumped into a couple of issues where restoration across the Commonwealth, which you heard from Sean, is our vision. These guidelines will become more and more important because there's a few things in here that really inhibit restoration statewide. #1, of course, is, and you aquaculturists in the room know, we have a prohibition against planting in prohibited areas. Outright prohibition, and that makes a lot of sense particularly for raw oysters. And when we're talking about restoration, as Sean indicated, we're focused on oysters primarily. And so, as you saw from Sean's model slide, much of the state is red. It's prohibited. And so we, as an agency, took this opportunity to say, one, we need to update these anyway. And secondly, how are we going to deal with this prohibited area issue in the guidelines? So we formed a subgroup. We've been working very hard, and our goal is for this winter to revise this document and come up with a draft. And we'll definitely want some input from this group on those updates. So stay tuned. This will be coming to you at some point. And we want to have the latest edition, I would say 2026 would be our goal, to have an updated guidelines.
A little bit of history, this was created, I think at the request of TNC back in the day, and it was pre-Shellfish Advisory Panel. So it'd be very appropriate to get the panel's sort of feedback. Didn't exist when it was first created, so. Right.
That's great.
And do you want to do the green crab?
Yeah, I'll segue if there are any questions, but happy to answer any questions on the guidelines. But stay tuned. This will, as Dan said, be coming back to you probably by the spring meeting. So I'll roll right into the next update. And the computer is frozen.
You would transfer the manual?
Let's see if this works.
Yep.
So everyone in this room knows about the green crab. We've been battling this invasive exotic predator for many years. And primarily its largest impact, as you all know, has been to shellfish. Historically, it's really been focused on soft shell clams because they're really notorious for predating on soft shell clams. However, the issue has really gone much bigger than soft shells. It's gone national, and where at DMF, it's been really focused on the North Shore, particularly around the Great Marsh. Now it's really expanding statewide. And I just want to give you an update on what DMF is doing, as well as what others around the state are doing, and talk to the panel about some changes that have been recommended. So the impetus for this update was just a couple of weeks ago on the right. You can see there was a regional green crab summit held up on the North Shore in Senator Tarr's district. He's got a green crab task force. If you recall, last year, we talked about expanding the geographic scope of that task force, and should it be expanded statewide under this body. I think I recommended that Senator Tarr and the North Shore Task Force is happy to talk about this issue statewide, and said to this group, why reinvent the wheel? Let's just have that task force increase its sites statewide, and Senator Tarr was really amenable to that. So it really is now the Massachusetts Green Crab Task Force, and they had their first ever summit here. If you look at that agenda, it's pretty expansive, a lot going on, lots of recommendations. We actually have people from around the country, and even the Canadian consulate came to this summit, so it was a pretty big deal, and really, the goal was to up our efforts in terms of green crab control, and a few of the outcomes there were these bullets here. One of the recommendations that came out of this was really, instead of looking at the green crab program, which exists today, as an eradication program, which one, it's really gonna be impossible to do that, but the eradication and invasive angle really was holding back some of the potential markets. And the thought was to, let's talk about this as a real resource and a fishery, and stop talking about eradication, stop talking about invasive species, because the people that are using this critter for food, for the biopharmaceutical industry, et cetera, felt that that was a marketing detriment. So the idea is to try to, instead of having a trapping control bounty program, let's try to evolve towards a real fishery and treat this just like any other underutilized species, as we've done historically. To me, I was a little slow on the uptake, but it really puts a whole light on it to hear from all these industry folks to change that angle and how important that was. So that's what I meant by the branding program problem here. There are a million ideas for these critters, but ultimately, how do you incentivize a fishery? The committee that formed the agenda here really came up with an economic analysis and came up with a value of 75 cents to $1 a pound, which is really what you would need to incentivize fishers to go after these without the DMF bounty. And so then how do you develop industries that will pay that value to fishers to really increase the harvest of these pests? The other big news is, and some of you here were very instrumental in that, is the bounty program, which DMF administers, which was restricted to the Great Marsh, now in its 11th year, largely due to an earmark from Senator Tarr, was expanded to Cape Cod this year, which is great news. But unfortunately, it's only $25,000, and that won't go very far. For example, to put that in context, the North Shore communities get about $10,000 to $15,000 each community. So we're talking about maybe 2 communities worth on Cape Cod if we were to recreate that same program. So we're gonna be coming to some of you all to figure out this winter how we're gonna stretch those dollars on the Cape. We've been talking to Barnstable, Chatham, and Wellfleet, who really have already developed some green crab programs there. And the idea now is maybe let's come up with a pilot program rather than try to spread the 25K amongst the whole Cape and build a real solid program. Then maybe we can expand from there. So stay tuned, and we'll be talking to panel members more on that in the coming months to really be ready for the spring trapping season. Really, what are we gonna do on the Cape? So good news. It's really expanding statewide, and more to come on green crabs.
Wayne, just one detail, there is a statute in chapter 130, I don't recall the specific statute, that basically gives the director the authority to authorize the removal of green crabs. And it doesn't really create like a fishery management approach. So for the representative, we might be coming in to maybe ask for it to be stricken, and then maybe we work with our commission to like create a new CMR. That's because right now these, like the program rules are just permit conditions that we all kind of generate on the fly. We're not going to our Marine Fisheries Advisory Commission or this group for any feedback, but we could in the future. That might be necessary just to nix that statute to go a normal regulatory route.
Just to add, so one additional complication to modernizing regulations for trapping green crabs. The thought here is to if the primary focus is marketing them for human consumption or making them edible crabs, we run into a little bit of complication on how we permit edible crab fisheries in Massachusetts, and that is in Massachusetts, all edible crabs are paired with the commercial lobster permit, so you would need if they're labeled an edible crab, then they become tied to the coastal lobster permit, which is if it's already it's a limited entry, only transferable fishery to get into, so it's not, we can't expand it there, so we'd
So
have
maybe instead of striking the statute, we could go and ask for an amendment.
an amendment to separate the edible crabs, but that, it has its complications as well.
Fair point.
But just something to think about with that, it's not an easy strike of the stroke of the pen in that case.
Yeah, to really expand this to what's needed, we would be talking about hundreds of trappers, because they're inshore, small scale, so obviously that would be a major impediment.
Yeah, we can work on that.
Sure.
Bill?
Do we have any data on green crabs, list of predators, et cetera?
Well, Story, do we collect green crab landings data?
We do. I'm not sure how reliable it is, but we do.
Yeah.
But we don't have any biomass studies.
Oh,
So, I've been working with, watching green crabs, I think for 8 years now. I think that's when they started becoming prevalent. And, I mean, they were there. But in the last 2 years, and especially this year, their successful spawns have been unbelievable. And they're a big problem for me, and it will be for other growers, in that they get in your seed bags. Okay, anything less than an inch, inch and a half. And the oysters go dormant in the winter, and the crabs, all the little babies, they just keep growing. And by the spring, they're like an inch, inch and a half, and all they've been doing all winter long is eating seed oysters. And I cannot get over the number of little tiny green crabs we're seeing this year. I think you're gonna have an explosion.
So then.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Stories of the story.
Thank-
Transactions.
I get to talk about old technology. The future of the Shellfish transaction card. First, we're gonna start with what is now the past, and that is the embossed Shellfish transaction card. So we've been nursing along an embossing machine that has been generating these cards for about 20 years. That machine, we were given the advice about a year ago by our service tech that comes down from Maine. Hey, I'm retiring in about a year and a half, so you guys need to think about what's next. Well, before he was able to retire, the computer that the machine was attached to actually died, and our IT was like, it's over. So anyway, for multiple reasons, this older technology of embossing cards is done. So after, in another week or two, we won't be printing any more of these embossed cards. And, the representative, every printing company we talk to is you need to move off the embossed cards. You can't buy those machines anymore. You don't want to buy those machines anymore. So this is done. So where does that leave us for 2026? Well, we don't have another card solution yet. So what we're gonna do is condition the Shellfish permits for 2026 to basically say, okay, we're not issuing, at least to start the year, we're not issuing you a card. So you're gonna have to either carry your paper permit or an electronic copy on your phone, picture of it, PDF of it, and use that in conjunction with your picture ID, like the reg says. So that's what we're gonna be giving out that statement of permit conditions with 2026 Shellfish permits, okay? And in the meantime, we're trying to figure out what the longer term solution is. So we can get another card printing machine that's not going to emboss, but it can have year, name, whatever information we can print on it. That's a possibility if we need it. We're costing that out right now, and
So the cost is twofold. It's the machine, the printer machine, which, you know, whatever, we can figure that out. They're probably $5,000 to $7,000. And then the second piece of that is the connection that we have to build to our database. So basically, we issue a bunch of permits one day, and then the next day you print them on the card machine. We need to build that connection. And so, you know, our early estimates of what this would cost us to rebuild is maybe upwards of 20 grand. We're trying to figure that out. But we need to hear from you all and others, you know, is a card that isn't embossed, does that help? You know, what does that get us that a paper permit doesn't? So, you know, we just need to think about, you know, what's the value of moving forward of printing a different type of card. So that's the type of feedback we're looking for. And I know Wayne's had conversations with, I think, Alex and a few others in the room about this, and that feedback's all helpful. So we're just kind of specking this out. We need to talk to law enforcement. I know we have some constables in the room. You know, do those cards provide you value as opposed to a paper permit or, you know, of the version of the paper permit that you might see? So those are the types of, that's the type of information we want over the next couple months as we try to figure this out. So.
Dan, can I just jump in? I use this card a lot. Not as much as I used to. But, so you go through the mechanics of this, you go in there, you hand in their card, they run it through the machine, it indicates your name, your number, the date. And well, they're not necessarily the date, but now are you suggesting that the buyer is now going to manually write in that information of the permit? Which leads one thing, they're gonna make mistakes in the course of thousands of transactions, you know, so the card advantage is, it's always gonna be my name, it's always gonna be my number.
Yeah.
You know, it's only gonna be.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I thought the card situation worked pretty well, but I mean, you have to ask how much additional confusion, work, extra is gonna be with the paper permits, because, I mean, they know it's me, they know I'm Son Cox, but when you start writing in names and numbers, it could get.
Yeah, you can transpose the number.
Yeah, or you could say, hey, Joe, you know.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna write your name down, I'll write my grandmother's name down, you don't have to worry about it, you know, I mean, not to be cynical, but that's the world we live in, you know, so. I mean, so the permits, you're not gonna send out the cards for this next year.
We don't have the ability to,
No,
no.
I'm
So
so,
we're not doing transaction slips at all?
You're still gonna do transaction slips. I'm looking towards DPH, that's a DPH reg. As of now, you're still gonna do transaction slips.
I mean, I see a whole lot of issues. One of them is that it gets wet.
Yeah.
And, these guys have to keep it on their person, and they'll probably have it for 2 days. Yeah, so,
Yeah.
that's, and also you can, make copies. And that's the one thing, somebody else was using somebody else's seller's card. So there's another issue, because if somebody is, on a car, I mean, on a back or truck, they're not gonna say, I wanna see your picture ID too, you know, so there's just a lot of complications.
So what if you were to put a QR code on a regular plastic card, and then have the dealers scan that? You can get a phone-based app.
Yeah.
To scan a QR code that could generate the data, person's name, address.
And we can put that type of information on the card. These cards, actually, that barcode, and there's a barcode, and then the magnetic strip have some of that information on, so that's a possibility. Bill,
Story, can you just extend the use of the 2025 card until we have a solution, please?
we can think about that. We just wouldn't be able to issue a new one if we had a
Yeah.
new permit holder in, so that's a good suggestion.
I know we kind of went over all these issues with Wayne, but you know, to me, it's really a DPH issue. Because that transaction slip is really where everything lies, and it's not that transaction slip, it's the 3 copies. And, you know, preferably, and really the pink one that we have to keep as well, so. If DPH can come up with some solution that goes electronic, it would also make tracebacks much more efficient.
It would need a red sheet.
Yeah, I'll speak to that. For those of you who don't know, I'm Eric Hickey, Assistant Director of Division of Food Protection, DH. And it's my program that inspects the certified shellfish dealers in Massachusetts. Historically, the transaction card, I believe, was developed in 1983 between by DMF and DPH. At the time, that was still current technology, the old slider, credit card machines. And this provided a sort of manifest of shellfish, particularly people that are harvesting multi-species that are delivering at the same time to a wholesale dealer. Over the years, the National Shellfish Sanitation Program required enhanced record keeping, receiving ledgers, sales ledgers, etc. So this has become somewhat of an overlapping document. I hesitate to use redundant because it's not the same thing as the sales ledgers. And it has come in very useful in certain situations. Two I can think of right off the top of my head. One, a routine inspection where an inspector is going into a facility and there is some kind of discrepancy between, you know, what is on the tag, what is in the receiving ledger. You go back, as Alex pointed out, to that transaction slip copy, and that has prevented violations from becoming critical, or requesting the disposal of shellfish in the course of an inspection. In recent years, the transaction slip has proven to be very useful in Vibrio investigations. So one of the things that industry has always been concerned about is the quality of tracebacks that DPH and DMF conduct when we're investigating illnesses, because as you know, a certain amount of illnesses over a certain amount of days results in a growing area of bloating, and no one wants to see that. So this is an enhancement that helps with these tracebacks. Sean, you just pointed out that it would require a regulatory change. DPH is currently revising its retail regulations 590. And after that, we'll be examining 500 and be making necessary changes to update our regs. That's not necessarily speaking to the agency when I say this, but this is something that's anticipated to come in the next couple of years. In the meantime, this is something that DPH and EMF and Director Michael Morris will provide. This is something that DPH and DMF are discussing and will be discussing as one of our number of issues come January of 26 when we meet for our quarterly meetings. So I can assure you this is not the last you'll hear of it. We'll have an opportunity to discuss between the two agencies as we head into our routine inspection cycle in late winter of 27.
That's what I've got. So, any other feedback, and obviously we'll bring out to the industry as we think of other solutions. We're going to talk to you all about this before we do anything crazy. All right.
Yes. When do we expect the next SAP meeting to take place this winter?
Typically, March would be about the time frame we would normally do it.
Or maybe sooner, but we can just give an update on, it sounds like it's a particularly germane.
Yeah, absolutely. And Alex and George have been really offered to be a sounding board on this for the panel as well.
Yeah, I mean, timing wise, if there's gonna be changes, a lot of us, I'm sure in this room, have built software off of the current technology, so if we have to adapt
Sure.
and change that, then obviously the more notice, the better.
And Bill's suggestion of maybe extending the validity of the 2025 cards as part of it,
Yeah.
as part of a stopgap, we can do that. We can think about that. I don't see a problem with that, but we can talk through those issues. Okay.
I think I'm up next on surf claims. Okay, the surf claim story is an interesting one. I'm glad we've got the EP participation today, but it was about 20 years ago, the town of Provincetown filed a suit against some of the fishing vessel owners who were surf clam fishing using what's called a dredge, hydraulic dredge specifically off Provincetown's shoreline. And so they had enacted some local regulations that called upon the DEP authority to regulate dredging under the Wetlands Protection Act. And so it was a contracted, legal battle, went over a few years, but in the end, it was a court decision and an appeals court decision backing up the town that this was in fact a form of dredging. However, nothing really came of it in terms of anybody getting issued a dredging permit. It was pretty awkward. And so the legislature, 2 years ago, enacted these changes in the bold-faced, basically establishing that vessels permitted under chapter 130 to conduct fishing activities wouldn't be subject to the Wetlands Protection Act and the need for a water quality cert. So we've come up with some new ideas to address some of the issues. I mean, in Provincetown, the big issue was the boats were right up against the beach, and the locals were just super uptight. We didn't see that same kind of tension among some of the other coastal towns. But what we really did want to do is sort of address sort of the spatial management. So the existing rules are a 12-foot contour. In other words, boats can come, in as close as 12 feet at mean low water in the winter, and within 20-foot mean low water in the basically spring and summer and fall. The problem with that is that those contours don't exist. They're interpolations based on the nautical chart, and they're not only are they not enforced, but they're not complied with on a pretty wide scale basis. So what we've decided is we want to take a new approach. We want to create lines in the ocean, and use geofencing with these low-cost trackers. This is a tracker that's now required of all federal lobster trap permit holders. And the data is collected, the data goes into a database down at ACCSP. It's considered confidential data, so we don't share it with anybody. But it allows us to see where a federal lobster boat is fishing, and based on the speed that we know that a boat typically hauls a trawl, you can sort of infer where that fishing is occurring. So this data wouldn't necessarily be the kind of data you could write a violation on, but it would give you an opportunity to sort of work with that vessel, and also, maybe in the next day, find that boat behind the line. And it would be in real time. So it is possible that if a boat is fishing in a place that it shouldn't, law enforcement could use that to go out and make a real-time case. So anyway, what we're trying to do is we've created some new lines. I'm gonna get to those next, we're approximating the 12-foot depth contour. These are proposals, and we think we're gonna go out to public hearing in the next month. It's been about a year. Last winter, we spent a lot of time inviting the communities to come in and give us feedback. So we did get some feedback from DEP, and the two recommendations we got from DEP was try to use a new eelgrass data layer, because the one we were using was outdated, and also create a 200-foot buffer zone around all the known eelgrass beds. And so this is the kind of closures that we're proposing. You can see especially the graph on the right, we're doing our best to protect, the Billingsgate area. Now, and Alan Renkrell can speak to this. No surf clam captain worth its salt is gonna wanna have a toe inside of an eelgrass bed. But there's a lot of turnover in these captains' positions, so this is, something that we think will bring about a lot of integrity into the system, and also allow, the boats to sort of, fish where they should. So those are, statewide, we've got a whole bunch of lines that we've drawn. We would put these positions into like a data layer that the boats could download into their plotter. And also, because it's geofencing, there's a feature where the vessel operator and the vessel owner could get a message when the boat is over a line, and it's pretty creative. We've actually given these out to pilot them. I know Alex has been involved, and and some of the other boats, so, we're pretty excited about it, so we think we're meeting the goals of that DEP has to protect sensitive habitats. And at the same time, maybe push the boats out to where they should be fishing. Anyway, that's just the details. It's 7 years of service, it's up to 50, and the device $1,500. So on an annual basis, it's only about $200 to $300 a year. So anyway, so public hearings are coming up shortly. One of the things we are proposing is a seasonal closure at Herring Cove, off Provincetown. It's just so controversial up there. It makes sense to, keep the boats out except during those months that it's critical for them. Which is, we're proposing a May 15th to October 15th closure up off of Provincetown. And, other than that, we didn't really get too much feedback from municipalities. But there will be one more opportunity to give us feedback at the next round of public hearings. Or the round of public hearings, which we expect to have before Christmas. And there it is. Yeah, those are the user group conflict areas. Down off of Plymouth and Barnstable. That's an area where we've had a lot of problems with gear conflicts during that time period, the May 15th to October 15th period. So we're proposing to close those areas as well. One of the challenges is lobstermen are now forced to pull all their gear in February through mid-May, which means most of them pulling the gear out as soon as January, some even earlier. And so it's definitely a sharing situation. So we hope that the boats will have, the surf climb boats will have better access to the beds, especially during the winter when there's no lobster gear there. Okay, other proposals. Maintain the closure in state waters north of Hull, but establish a process to investigate any opportunities. And especially as we go with new classifications. As we open some areas. Establish a process to open and close other areas of state waters, like surf climb fishing. And then lift the night closure during the 3-month period for the boats to be actually fishing there. With the trackers, so we'll know where they are. So that's it. I'll take any questions. All right, next is the growing area up here.
Yep.
Matt Camisa.
Nice and simple update. My apologies to those of you that have already seen this content last month at the MSOA meeting in New Bedford. So every year, the FDA comes out and audits us. This is for growing area classification. They were here this past August. Those are the 13 areas they visited. I'm happy to report that we had no new deficiencies nor any new and emerging concerns. Thanks in large part to our close relationship with these excellent shellfish constables, some of which are here today. We count on them to be able to do our jobs and classify these areas and manage them appropriately. The one thing they did see is birds on gear, and Alex Boeri is going to come up right after me and yell at you if you have birds on your gear. He's been instructed to do so. Let's see. Yeah. So next year, they've already told us where they're going. These are the areas that they're going to hit us with in August of next year. So if you're on the list, be ready. Seth, we're coming for you.
Right.
What does that mean? Well, we're obviously going to ask you to make sure that there are no birds on gear. Make sure there's at least bird deterrence there, so there's an effort to keep birds, and I don't mean 5 birds on the gear, I mean birds on gear, right? Also proper signage, any prohibited areas should have appropriate signs on the shoreline. It's so nice to take them on a boat ride and say, see that sign right there? From there to the right, it's closed, and they love it. They absolutely love seeing that. And of course, depending on the location that we go to, we may ask folks for a boat ride to host us and FDA to go through those growing areas. And then I think technically this is Alex's slide. I think I'm supposed to touch on the MSOA training course. I don't have a slide for that because Renee presented that at the MSOA meeting last week. However, as most of you know, we're putting together a new MSOA training course. We are partnering with 4Cs on the Cape, and they are going to release this as a regular course, a semester-long course. There's going to be 3 in-person, face-to-face days, yes.
Little background from the representative. So state statute requires constables to be experienced, and if they pass a course, it's considered sufficiently experienced.
Correct. Historically, that was an 80-hour-long course that was specifically spelled out in our section 98 as Mass Maritime Academy training course. Mass Maritime no longer wishes to collaborate with us for that course. And COVID messed things up as well. So we've sort of reconfigured everything, led us to Four Seas down at the Cape. They're in Hyannis, I guess. And that's where we are now. We're putting this together. So we're down to 60 hours of content, I believe. They're going to release, let's say, anywhere between 3 to 5 hours of pre-recorded presentations every week. So the students can watch them whenever it's convenient for them. There's sort of a little question answer session. There's an hour every week where the students can sign in and ask direct questions virtually with the presenters from that week. And then there's some days are face-to-face because, for instance, environmental police may choose to not pre-record all of their content for a whole host of reasons, and they feel more comfortable presenting that in person. So there'll be, it looks like we're aiming for at least 3 face-to-face days to accommodate anybody who, for whatever reason, can't record that content and deliver it.
Yeah, so the Mass Shellfish Health Association has taken the lead on this, which is good, and we hope to create this. It's gonna be a 3-credit course at the
Yes.
community college, which is really novel. And we're pretty excited about it. So it's all gonna be sort of self-funded too, right, by the attendees?
I believe there's a $750 price tag per
Okay.
attendee.
Yeah.
Hopefully the municipalities will come up with that money to send whoever needs to go.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, the challenge is a constable can be hired any time of the year, but this training was every 2 years. So we had some untrained constables, and so this can this be done every year, do you think?
so I think what we were going to do is first get it off the ground this spring, right, starting in January. But then we would have sort of this core concentration of material that would be required of any new constable coming on the job. Outside of this classwork, they have to at least cover this amount of material to get some basic education, like they need to know what Vibrio is long before they're doing their duties as a constable.
Yeah.
So, yes,
Right.
and it's gonna be offered, is it every year, was it, Renee? It could be, right?
Could be. I mean, initially, this first round will be dedicated to the people that we had signed up who actually needed the certification, whether it's for their job or their anticipation of where they go.
And I think we have 40, right? 40.
We currently have 40 listed on the MSOA list, but whether or not all those 40 will register once the course is actually put up online. I do want to also mention that we thought that we would go through this course session before we started to really take a look at the language in 98, which will need to be reworked and amended to accompany what goes on in the future as far as the professional service.
And to take out the language of Mass Maritime specifically.
That line is already.
No.
I don't believe it has, no.
That language is still there. And we also kind of tossed around the idea of whether or not this was going to be mandated for constables, or whether, currently the language is gray. It just states that they're considered trained with this certificate. So that's something else we'll need to discuss and change the language if that's the course we want to take.
So you guys are doing an amazing job on this, and we really appreciate it. We're impressed. And I just want to announce that the annual David Belding Award, the Marine Fisheries Advisory Commission approved a nomination of Henry Lynn. So we're gonna give Henry that award, probably scheduling it for the MSO meeting, in March.
All right, well.
Yeah.
Is that a secret?
No, well, I called him and told him, yeah, he knows, but, we wish we could do it sooner, but I think having the impact of doing it at MSOA would be better than any other format.
And Henry and Renee have both been absolutely instrumental in getting this training up and running, which we're almost there. We're getting close. I've got some completed presentations. Folks are dialing in on the details, and it's exciting. It's gonna be good. Yeah.
Everything we envisioned is coming to fruition.
Yeah. So are there any questions on the peer or the training?
Just a comment on the MSOA class, one of the units, believe it or not, is on this panel itself. So constables will be learning all about this panel, and the course will be encouraging constables to use this group as a resource as the Commonwealth's primary shellfish related advisory board. So you guys will be highlighted.
Just do it, to make this, on this an aside. Unfortunately, one of the issues that shellfish constables engage is some nasty characters out there that give them a hard time, some threats, I mean, I obviously, most don't carry weapons and stuff, so I would think that part of this training would be how to, resolve how to deal with people who are nasty and refuse to cooperate and complain that they're gonna call their lawyers and so forth.
That's a really good point, and one of the very complex issues we had to deal with a few years ago, as we were talking about this, is the post commission, which is the legislation and the body that deals with, I guess, that's where the put it is like police behavior or police.
Police reform.
Okay, and so we really tried to investigate. Okay, well, they're constables, and yes, some of them are special police officers because they're employed by the police, but how many times does a constable, are they put into a situation where they need to make an arrest? Because if they have to make an arrest, then they need to be trained, at that next level by the post committee. And what we discovered is there were virtually no instances where someone was arrested without the help of a police officer. So the constables know enough that if they're gonna get into that kind of situation, to call on the police. But, I take your point. It's that's part of the challenge.
And with that, there actually is a course on conflict resolution.
Yeah.
So we're really actually still looking for somebody to actually give that presentation because it's kind of a unique situation. Those conflict resolutions are board meetings, et cetera. It's not really out in the field. So if anybody has any suggestions for a speaker on that slot.
I would go to post because they have classes on de-escalation.
It's interesting because I did talk to our police chief and those entities are very reluctant to give those types of training unless you are under that, police umbrella.
It's interesting.
Another point of this is, so this first round, we have roughly 40 people that are interested. We believe they're all existing or want to be constables or deputies. Moving forward, they don't have to be. It can be anyone from the public can take this course.
Yeah.
So there lies the complication of, are we really gonna teach the general public how to put handcuffs on someone? That gets a little tricky.
We got Homeland Security.
Hey, it's never as easy as you want it to be.
Thank you, Renee.
Yeah, right.
Alice?
Thank you. All right, I wanted to discuss some concerning trends with illnesses related to shellfish this year. I think it's important for the panel to consider. So the numbers you see at the top here, we've had for Vibrio 27 single source and 13 multi-source. Those have actually grown a little bit since I made this slide. I don't know the exact number, but it's 28 or 29 single source and around 15 multi-source. Most of those actually are all from Dale's site. And that's what you get yelling at us. That's a joke, just so everyone knows they're not the Dale's site.
What happens when you open your mouth?
So it did, on a more serious note, it did include 2 closures, Vibrio closures based on the NSSP guidelines. One in Duxbury, Plymouth, Kingston, and one in Pleasant Bay. Wellfleet also came very close to having to close in September, but luckily we didn't quite get there, but it was very close. So I did just want to quickly touch on the differences in how closures are made. With Vibrio specifically in the NSSP, there's guidelines for numbers of illnesses in a 30-day period, and that dictates when closures need to happen and how long the closures will be. So that's how closures come about a lot. DMF and DPH also have a slightly lower threshold for a precautionary closure than what's in the NSSP, and that's to hopefully avoid longer closures and curb illnesses as they start to come in. That's very different from what I'm going to talk about next, which I can skip this one, is Campylobacter. So any illnesses, illness outbreaks other than Vibrio, when we get them, there's no number of illnesses or anything like that. It's when we're notified of an outbreak, we have 24 hours to either close the area or complete an investigation. That goes for Campylobacter, neurovirus, anytime when there's an outbreak linked to shellfish. That's important to note. We had a lot of Campylobacter illnesses this year, 19 cases, including 5 outbreaks. There was a closure on the vineyard in both Menemsha and Katama. I'm a little concerned about this, and I think this number of cases is going to continue to grow in future years. And I think it's important for this panel to kind of understand that and to contemplate that. So like I said, when we get these 5 outbreaks, we're required to conduct an investigation, complete an investigation within 24 hours, or we have to close. Luckily for most of these, thanks to the hard work of DPH and all their staff, we were able to complete investigations before that 24-hour mark, but that's very hard to do, and it's very unlikely that we'll be able to do that for closures going forward, especially if the cases continue to grow.
Sorry, Alex, what's the definition of an outbreak? How many illnesses?
Sure. So for anything other than Vibrio, it's 2 illnesses from different households. And that's really all there is. So a lot of times it could be one party at a restaurant that gets sick at the same table, but if they're from 2 different households, it's considered an outbreak. It's often more than that. For instance, the closure that we had in Menemsha and Katama, it was, I don't remember the exact number of illnesses. Someone can fill me in if they remember, but it was like 8 or 9 illnesses from multiple restaurants, multiple growers in both locations. And that's a real outbreak, but sometimes it's not that expansive. It only needs to be 2 sick individuals, where the shellfish are linked to the same growing area, and they have to be from 2 different households. So it's a pretty low bar.
What's the criteria for reopening?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I'm trying to think of the best way to answer that. For the closure that happened, we tested for fecal, right? So we tested for fecal with the assumption that Campylobacter in the growing area is most likely the result of bird contamination, bird feces, and we'd see a fecal trace in water and meat samples if it were there. We tested both meat and water samples or fecal, got nothing, got below what we needed to reopen. Last year we had 1 outbreak in Yarmouth where we tested for Campylobacter, and that caused a whole host of problems, as I'm sure you're well aware. The oysters in the area tested positive for a different strain of Campylobacter than what people got sick from, but it was still a pathogenic strain, so we couldn't reopen. We were getting, one week we'd get positive results, the next week we get negative results from the same exact batch of oysters. So this year, this is actually something that Maine was doing where they were testing just fecal to reopen. We've started doing that as well. And so that's a big part of it. The other thing we're looking for in particular is if there's floating gear and there's signs of bird presence on the floating gear at these sites. If we see that, part of the reopening criteria will be to remediate that problem. Either the gear needs to be sunk or bird deterrence needs to be fixed and the birds need to be removed from the area.
So there's no set time period, like 7 days or
No.
5 days or?
Nope. Yeah, it's completely dependent on us being sure that there's no risk to public health, essentially. So that it's these types of illnesses, this goes for neurovirus too. They're very different from Campylobacter from Vibrio, where there's set 14-day, 21-day closures. It's a little more open-ended with everything else. The really important thing to note about this, last year we had, I think it was like 3 or 4 cases. This year we have 19 cases of Campylobacter. Campylobacter is one of the most common sources of foodborne illness in the United States. I think we're starting to see that anytime oysters are consumed and Campylobacter pops up, that's being noticed. And I think this number is going to rise greatly. I think we're probably seeing more than 19 next year. It will keep going up. It's going to cause big problems, I think, where we're going to see more closures, more outbreaks. And it's something to keep in mind. And on top of that, I just wanted to show some big pictures of what we saw related to birds on floating gear. This is, to my understanding, the most likely cause of Campylobacter in oysters is birds on floating gear. These pictures are from all over the state, from the North Shore to the Cape and the Islands. There's a bunch of sites we saw with lots of birds, no bird deterrence. If we have a Campylobacter outbreak and I go to investigate and see this, they're going to be closed for a significant period of time. You know, they have permit, everyone has permit conditions where they need to use bird deterrents. It's not an easy thing. There's no one bird deterrent that works perfectly. You know, you have to work at it. The farmers need to continually change what they're doing, move stuff around. It's really not easy. There's no great solution to this, especially in areas with high bird volume. And so I think this is something that the panel might want to consider is looking into what could be proper bird deterrence, what can be done to solve some of these problems. And, you know, obviously, if we go out to your site and see 3 or 4 birds, that's not really the issue we're talking about. We're talking about these types of things where we see vast gear covered in birds, no bird deterrence. This is a real problem, and going forward for next year, we're going to have to get a lot stricter about this. And if we see this, individual sites are going to get closed down for a period of time until the problem can be rectified. Go ahead, Dale.
So, I mean, if I've got 800 of those floating cages out there, I'm not gonna, put a bird deterrent on every single one of them, just economically not feasible. Is it acceptable to do a resubmergence type of treatment where you're taking them and putting them in water that is not exposed to bird feces for some period of time, 5 days, 7 days, 10 days?
Yeah, this is something I've had a bunch of discussions with people about. And I know that in some states, I think they're starting to do it in New Hampshire and maybe Maine, they do something similar where they don't allow sale of oysters out of floating gear. They require that anything in floating gear be submerged for a period of time. And that's definitely an option we can explore. I will say though, that doesn't allow for this to be okay, essentially. This is still seen as a pollution source. When FDA sees this, it's a big problem. They consider this a new and emerging concern. And, you know, it could possibly result in classification statuses being changed if this is impacting water quality. So while yes, that's a way that we could potentially go to reduce Campylobacter illnesses and reduce length of closures and things like that, I don't think that's not a substitute for bird deterrence. You know, you're still gonna have to come up with something, whether it's kites or, you know.
I think they hired a seasonal employee specifically just to monitor Washburn when it was busy bird season, and that was like physically hired a bird deterrent.
Yeah.
I don't know that everyone can do that, but I mean, if it's gonna keep you compliant and have ways to do so, you know, for the year.
Yeah, no, it's a tough problem, and I feel for you because I understand exactly what you're saying. I mean, it's not possible to deter every bird off your site, and it's not possible.
We don't really have an effective deterrent yet.
Right.
I mean, I've tried 2 or 3 different things, and none of them seem to work.
Go ahead, Josh.
So it's clear you want to go after the bird issue, and, you know, we've had those initial conversations with natural heritage and endangered species with concern about some of the deterrents. Have you gotten any feedback from them?
Yeah, a little
What's
bit.
okay, what's not okay?
So they don't want to give us a hard line about what's okay and what's not okay, right?
Yeah.
You can't tell them, is this okay? And they say yes or no. Really, their stance has been that passive deterrence, they're generally okay with, and active deterrence, they're not. So if you can't fly a drone to deter the birds, or probably using calls to deter them, is they probably would not like that, you know.
Doesn't work anyway, so.
It didn't, yeah. Yeah, so it's I guess part of my problem with this is I understand how hard it is to get rid of the birds, how big of a problem it is, but I also know from our side of it, when we have these growing Campylobacter illnesses and we see this, it's gonna cause a huge problem. We're headed to a place where it's gonna come to a head at some point. And, you know, I'm worried the answer might be that there are areas where we might have to not allow floating gear, right? And I don't really want to do that, right? I don't think anyone wants to do that. But if we can't collectively figure out a way to stop these types of situations from happening, and we see an increase in illnesses and FDA is paying attention, you know, we might be headed this way.
So Ketchum's have come up with a solution. Now all of their floats are bird shit prey.
Yeah. I can still see it. I'm the expert. I still see it. Go ahead, Bill.
Alex, in Plymouth, we have a boat called the Mayflower. Go by it constantly, all year round. There's never a bird on it, never. The birds, seagulls, cormorants, they fly up to it and they use sound waves.
Oh, yeah.
I bought a solar powered sound wave generator. I'm not sure what type it was. And it worked. I mean, I only did a little test. It had a motion sensor, bird comes, thing goes, bird takes off.
That's good to know. Yeah, I think, you know, as this problem gets more prevalent and people start trying different bird deterrents, I do think the bird people with natural heritage, there's things when they hear it, they're not gonna like, and it's, you know, it's one of those things where we have to try to work with them and work together to come up with solutions, and maybe that's a solution, we can run it by them. But there's some areas that have major abutter issues, you know, like if you have property owners that live right by these sites and every time a bird flies, they hear some crazy noise driving the birds, that's
No noise, silent.
just sound waves.
Just sound.
All right, well, that might be an option. Anyone else have any questions about illnesses or birds or?
Just a question, so it's one of our members, Mass Aquaculture, who is from the Three Bays. Obviously, there was a closure that you had mentioned for so many days in late August. He says that data was collected 7 weeks before, is what he has in his letter. I'm not saying it's true or false, but there you were having a Vibrio incident 7 weeks later, you then have a closure. Is there any way to start adjusting that or understand that? Because I know it takes time to identify it, et cetera.
Right, so it's kind of the nature of illness investigations, you know, by the time someone gets sick, goes to the hospital, it gets diagnosed, that information then gets traced back through local boards of health to DPH, to DMF, to do the entire trace back. It's always like a minimum of 2 or 3 weeks at the very bare minimum by the time we get illnesses in, right?
Yeah,
And
that makes the closure punitive, not trying to solve the problem.
so the main point of especially the precautionary closures that we implemented here is to try to stem the closures from coming in, right? So while yes, they're 3 or 4 or 5 weeks late sometimes, there's still more coming in, there's still more happening, right? And if we're seeing a problem develop, even if it's a problem 3 weeks ago, we're enacting that closure to try to prevent it from getting worse, because under the NSSP, if we continue to get more illnesses, it's going to be a longer closure. So that's really the point. So the first level of closure that we have is 4 illnesses in a 30-day period, and we have a precautionary 7-day closure that we do. If we get more illnesses than that, if we get a 5th one, then it's a mandatory 14-day illness. And I can understand why those might feel punitive, but a lot of that's the NSSP, right? That's what we're required to do under the NSSP.
It really has to be handled at the national level.
Yeah, but I will say too, 7 weeks is a long time. That I'm trying to remember the exact timing. When we have that, it's 4 or 5 illnesses within a 30-day period of harvest, right? So the first one might be seven weeks out, and the most recent one might be 3 weeks out or something like that, right? That might be the timeline to get them. And DPH and their staff, they do an incredible job about getting these tracebacks done the immediate time that they're notified about them. So there's not a whole lot of room for us to decrease the time from when the illness happens to when we're notified about it or when we complete a trace back. It's really just kind of the nature of illness investigations, unfortunately. And we do take it into consideration as much as we can. So for instance, in the Wellfleet scenario, we arguably had enough illnesses in a 30-day period for a precautionary closure under the guidelines, the matrix that DPH and DMF set. But by the time we had received notice of the last illness, it was later in September. Everything had cooled off, the environmental conditions had changed, and we took that into account when we decided not to close. So we do take environmental factors into account. We try not to make them punitive. But especially once we hit the thresholds for the NSSP closures for Vibrio, our hands are kind of tied. We have to implement the closures as it says in the NSSP.
Thank you. So then two, I guess, suggestions. One is, and this is one of the concerns that this particular member had, is that could there have been better communication to the aquaculturists in those 3 bays to say, by the way, we're getting very, very close and we may have to have a closure, instead of suddenly waking up on Monday morning and realizing you have a 7-day closure right before the holidays.
Yeah.
So hopefully that could be addressed. And then it sounds like, Christie, talking with you, that you folks, DPH and others, are maybe having a Vibrio discussion in the near future.
Yeah, every year we get together and we evaluate the prior year's Vibrio season. We look at the Vibrio control plan. I think what happened here, typically we communicate for anything, whether it's a Vibrio closure, whether it's a reclassification, an emergency closure.
Yeah.
We communicate with the town, we communicate with the Shellfish constables, and then they have their methods of communicating with their constituents, and that's generally how it happens. If a formal notice goes out, a legal notice, then Alex does forward it to the towns, the individual growers. But typically, it's communicated to the town, it's communicated, so a formal letter goes out for all
Yeah.
single source illnesses to the town, the select board and the Shellfish constable. Typically, we copy MAA on those letters,
Yeah,
so
no, I get that, yeah.
MAA is aware of it.
So maybe we could have the secondary or tertiary, by the way, we're getting these letters, maybe we could send that out to our memberships. And I think Dale Scott usually forwards that to our constant contact. So anyway, in this particular case, this one particular member and the others there were concerned behind.
Just one last thing, I will say too, at the same time that was going on, there was a Campylobacter outbreak in Duxbury, Plymouth, at the exact same time. So they came very close to being closed for that at the exact same time. So there's a lot going on there, and it happened pretty quick. Sometimes places go from one illness to 4 or 5 illnesses in a weekend or something like that, depending on what's going on. But we can work on that. Yep.
Chris Sherman from Free Voices in Duxbury, and yeah, I think I just wanted to commend you guys, DMF and DPH, on the approach with the precautionary closure. Obviously, like, there was a lot happening quickly, and I think that it worked out pretty well to close and kind of stem whatever else was happening until we could, not accrue more illnesses. So I thought that was great. I did come here today, wanted to chat about the communication strategy as well. I think that component of it was challenging, and I think I understand what you're saying, Christy, in terms of like the town communication. We used to get, probably prior to the pandemic, it's been a while since we've had a closure in Duxbury. We used to get confirmed illness updates, like as each one kind of came in, as opposed to just like closure and opening notices from the DMF.
You're talking about the official notices?
The official notices,
Yeah.
yeah. And that may have been because I was the MAA president at the time where I was on that, but because I got them for all the towns. But instead of just opening and closure, it was also each confirmed case that came in. Obviously now statewide, there's too many confirmed cases to be sending out illness notifications every time there's an illness this day. That is actually what used to happen. However, I think when the area is under closure, having some degree, and I understand the position you guys are in, vis-a-vis legal notices and things like that, but a little more information and context around what's happening would just ease the burden of the closure in terms of, like, there's the closure piece of it, obviously, but then there's the operating in the dark and not being able to have a contextual understanding to make forward-looking decisions, particularly in advance of, like as Seth mentioned, Labor Day weekend, and it just kind of wreaks havoc on that aspect of it, so.
Yeah, so in your particular case, one of the biggest contention here was we communicate with the town clerks. Under no circumstance are we gonna tell a grower before the constable knows what's going on and the constable's gonna be getting calls. And what happened there was, instead of it getting blasted to all of the growers, some people happened to talk to the constable. And there was some indecision going on too. So it's like we were talking to the constable saying, okay, it looks like we're gonna have a closure. And then there was a stand down, okay, it's gonna be on, stand
Yeah.
down. And so we had the the constable talk to some growers who got a heads up, okay, shit's going down, we better harvest, and others didn't get that message.
Mhm.
So they're like, well, gee, if we knew something was going down, we would have harvested yesterday too. So how come some people had that information and others didn't? So that is a completely valid point. And I think maybe in terms of how we communicate things, but we need to be careful because the Shellfish constables need to be able to communicate to their bosses, the select board, before really, the rumor mill starts going around. So we usually defer to the constables to, really get that word out. Now, when we actually close something, the legal closure notices should have been forwarded to every single grow.
Mhm.
And so I think in terms of the illness notice, I think you're thinking of when you were on MAA. Because
Yeah.
we copy MAA, but we don't blast, we only copy the town, so we don't blast the whole state when there's an illness in one town. We send it to that town to let
Yes.
them know, and then we copy MAA.
Yeah, I guess we're just not getting the illness notifications
The growth.
forwarded to us by the constable at that point. Cause all we're getting is the statewide closure notifications, so.
We can work on that.
Yeah.
So say maybe if we have a policy where, if we give it a day, like how long does the constable need to make sure they have their ducks in a row to communicate it to their select board in their towns, or before we forward it to the growers that would be impacted by a closure. So that's a conversation we can have.
The only thing I would point out too is that, yes, the Shellfish constable obviously needs to know as well, but I don't know that there's the actual value add from, obviously, like getting the information to harvesters and dealers as quickly as possible is. They're the ones who are actually, harvesting, distributing and.
Yes,
consuming
dealers get
shellfish.
directly copied on every single notice.
This is another piece of it, that the database, like list management from GMF was also, like, I've talked to Wade, I've talked to Story, I probably talked to you at some point.
Yeah,
but can't seem
I
to
just
get on.
added you to the aquaculture one. so
Yes,
I
I
don't-
appreciate that. So, cause I'm getting these things forwarded to me, and there's like dealers out in Western Mass that are on here. And I'm like, I sell more than these oysters than anybody else, and I'm getting it forwarded to me by somebody else, so, I think, yeah, I'm just glad, I don't necessarily have like a problem or anything, I'm just saying that like, more communication is always welcome, faster communication is welcome. And just wanted to point out that it felt like we're flying blind for a little while there this summer, so. And I understand why, but just wanted to say that it's an area that probably more like justifies the effort that it sounds like you're already putting into it, so.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Wayne, quick update on the declaration fishery.
Yeah, I'm looking at the clock and I'll be really brief. We've been talking about this at the last several meetings at least. You heard in March that the governor finally made a decision to permanently close the oldest depuration facility in the country. Really exactly its 100th year anniversary, so it was a big deal. And so what we've been really focusing on is working with the affected fishers and the depuration community. And as you heard, we set up an arrangement where we help offset the additional cost to go up the road to Spinney Creek. Luckily, it's only 25 miles further up the road from Newburyport. And it's been working pretty well. All of the North Shore depuration fishers are actively using this facility. Unfortunately, the Boston Harbor folks have largely chosen to retire. And so Boston Harbor remains still on the sidelines at this point. We're trying to work through that, but it's working. They have a valid outlet. And people are still benefiting from the restricted fishery, at least in the North Shore. And the big news here is part of the factor in folks' decision to retire is generally our water quality is improving, at least from illicit sewage discharge and faulty wastewater systems, which is actually a good thing. So over time, there's less and less need for the restricted area classification. And we just met amongst DMF senior staff last week. In another month, we're gonna reclassify the majority of outer Boston Harbor to conditionally approved, thereby eliminating the most productive restricted areas in the Commonwealth, which is actually a good news story. This is sort of the last phase of the Great Boston Harbor cleanup. As we all know, shellfish have the most restricted water quality of any human uses. So it's really a good news, thinking about actually allowing shellfishing to go directly to market out of Boston Harbor. So that news is happening, and so probably won't get many more updates going forward because I think we successfully transitioned. Bob?
I just want to contextualize your first statement a little bit. Of Governor Haley deciding to close down the clam plant in March, which is true, and she closed under her authority. But I just want to make sure that everyone understands that it was our recommendation to do so because of a multitude of factors, including some catastrophic infrastructure issues we're having because of rising sea level and coastal storms, which obliterated the well pumps, and we did a study to look at the feasibility of bringing it back up online, and it was gonna be cost prohibitive and likely have a very short lifespan because of rising sea level. That in combination with the fact that we've seen somewhere in the order of magnitude of 70 or 80% decline in participation and output of the depuration fishery over the last 20 years. So between those two things, it was our recommendation to that the plant be closed. I didn't want to make it, I wanted to make sure everyone understood that we played a role and have responsibility there relative to that.
Yeah, but thanks for that, Bob. I short circuited based on the clock and the fact that we talked about it at several meetings. That's right, that's right.
Right. Wayne, yeah, legislative updates.
So just really quickly, you've heard a lot about legislation, and this is really what's happening. One thing I wanted to highlight is what's going on at the federal level. It was bipartisan legislation by Senator Scott in South Carolina and White House out of Rhode Island. As we all know, wild shellfishing is really disappearing up and down the eastern seaboard, particularly near shore. So oysters, quahogs, soft shell clams, all those fisheries are down by 80–90% from what they were at their peaks. And so this legislation, I don't even know why they came up with this funny acronym. It's crazy, but it's intended to address why are our wild shell fisheries, our inshore wild fisheries collapsing. And so there'll be much more, I think, about this. And Alan wanted to bring that to the group here. And then, of course, a lot of things going with the state. Our friends at MAA are our best source. They keep tabs on all the shellfish related legislation. This is currently in the current session. You can see there's well over 15 bills crossing lots of issues, which this group has been talking about. And again, MAA is really the lead on, shepherding a lot of these through, and they, across a lot of diversity of specific issues, a lot on the wastewater CSO issue, which this group has been talking a lot about. So that's about it.
Can I jump in here, Dan?
Yep, go ahead.
Supposedly representing the wild shellfish. I'll tell you, one of the reasons why it's declined is because in an inflationary cycle that's been going on for 10 years now, the price of the shellfish to the wild fishermen have dropped precipitously. I mean, right now in Chatham, they're buying little necks for 25 cents a piece. 10 years ago, we're getting 30 cents. Now, I know that this body can't do anything about the price. But if you want to look into the decline of the wild fishery, you can't ignore that, its price. And also, it's expensive to live in these places. It's expensive to live in Chatham. It's expensive to live in Falmouth or Barnstable or even in the North Shore, which means that a lot of people who normally do this have to go somewhere else, effectively inshore. But, and of course, you always think that if the price of the product drops to you and you're getting 800 or 900 a day, it's a big hit. but then people are growing tens of thousands, you know. I mean, so that also goes onto the market and that tends to lower the price. Now, it might affect the individual shellfishermen in the short run. But if the numbers, continue to rise, all right, and the laws of supply and demand kick in, eventually that's gonna hurt the growers too. And eventually you're gonna find out that as you double the number of co-ops or oysters that are going on the market, unless you expand the market, which I don't know. I know there's people out there trying to do that, so how successful they are, I don't know. But unless you expand the market, then you're gonna have what's happening to the aquaculturists is what happened already to the farmer, the family farms throughout the country. They grew too much corn, you know, they grew too much wheat. Eventually, the prices that they got for their product didn't match what their expenses were. Now, I don't know how far we are from there, but, and then also is gonna be demand for more area. You know, all of a sudden you can't make a living on an acre, 2 acres, you're gonna need 4, which means they're gonna have more production, which is gonna lead to the same issues. So, this is a big issue, it goes beyond this, but in looking at why the decline of the wild fishery is wild, like the fishery is, you can't ignore economic factors. It's not just environmental.
That's a great point. Like all things shellfish, it's complicated.
All right,
Thanks.
next on the agenda is a NESA and ISSC update. Eric Hickey from DPA is caught up on that. So you'll explain what each of those entities are.
Sure. So, you've probably all heard ISSC, Interstate Shellfish Shippers Conference. This is a rulemaking body that is comprised of FDA staff, state shellfish regulators and representatives from industry, as well as, other stakeholders. We meet every 2 years for a biennial meeting where we examine our regulatory document, which is called the model ordinance. And this is where we derive all the regulations that you folks are regulated under, because all the producing states in the United States adopt those requirements either through their own regulatory process or through reference or some other means. In Massachusetts, these are the regulations we use to evaluate certified shellfish dealers. So we had our fall executive board meeting on October 15th. I am a member of the executive board. I am the regulatory representative for Region 1, which includes Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. Unfortunately, due to the government shutdown and the furloughs that were a result of that, no federal agencies participated in that meeting. They are necessary in order to us to do business at the executive board. So we're talking about, most importantly, FDA, but also members of NOAA, EPA, and CDC. We agreed to meet again when the shutdown is over because we just couldn't conduct any business. We function under Robert's Rules of Order, similar to this committee. And we will probably meeting hopefully soon. If you've been paying attention to the news, it looks like some sort of extension of government is going to occur. Most committees are not currently meeting. Some have been, like the lab committee, which is one of the more active committees, but most committees, the one I chair, I'm unable to meet because we need FDA input. Hopefully we'll be able to resume committee activity soon. Some good news in all of this is the grant funding cycle attached to the ISSC is intact, meaning that the money that is provided by the federal government to fund the ISSC has been secured for the next fiscal year. And the AFTO grants for the cooperative programs, dairy and shellfish, have been preserved. So those are those small grants for equipment and training. Some other business that's going on, and we've got a very brief update on this from Bob Rowe, East Coast Shellfish Growers Association, is the Campylobacter purge study that the ISSC funded last year. And this is, I think, largely being done by URI with some other interested parties. I don't want to say too much about it because Bob gave a very quick overview of what's happening, but it looks like it's going to be some good news. The study consisted of collecting samples of oysters from different embayments around southeastern Mass, Cape Cod, and Rhode Island. They were inoculated with three humanly pathogenic strains of Campylobacter. And the initial results indicated that it took about 2 days for most of the samples to purge under resubmergence, up to 4 for a couple of samples. And Bob said that we're hoping to have something in 7 to 8 months for the ISSC to consider in terms of, results from this study. So that's about all I feel comfortable with sharing. I'm not privy to any additional information. But stay tuned. But I think that does speak to a point that was raised earlier, I think by you, Dale, about resubmergence as a way of dealing with Campylobacter. And I do know the state of Maine does encourage its growers to do that for those folks that are using floating gear. Another big topic at that executive board meeting was the biennial meeting. I think I was in front of this group last year, and I said that the next meeting was going to be in Denver, Colorado. With the pause in government when the Trump administration took over, and then concerns over possible government shutdowns and future proofing the conference, we agreed to move it to Nashville in May of 2026. Because of the government shutdown now, and concerns by some of the membership that not enough business has been conducted, we're not in a feeling in general that we're not prepared to have the biennial meeting. We are looking to reschedule it, probably January of 2027. We've authorized the executive director, Keith Skiles, to begin researching venues and start the process for that. I'm not crazy about January 2027 because that's a terrible time to travel, but it is a good time for industry because that's the point when our industry members, businesses slowed down and they're available to travel. As part of this discussion, the terms for board members are extended until the next biennial meeting, which means I'll be serving in regulatory one until 2027 when I come up for re-election. Currently, the industry representative on the executive board for Region 1 is Lori Howell of Spinney Creek Shellfish. So for the folks in industry who are here, that's a good person to get to know. So continuing with the ISSC news. So Keith Skiles, the ISSC director, announced his retirement at the last executive board meeting. Keith, for 17 years, worked for the Division of Shellfish Sanitation in the state of Virginia. And then in 2020, he became the executive director of the ISSC, which is the paid position, paid through FDA funding, the day-to-day operations of the ISSC. So there's 3 paid staff. There's the executive director and then his or her admins. So he's retiring. He has years of experience. I remember consulting him when Massachusetts first dealt with Vibrio and Virginia had Vibrio for a few years. I think this is going to be a challenge for the conference. Finding the next person is going to be difficult. So we've put together a search committee and we'll be discussing that the next time we meet. Problem here is that the people who are qualified for the job are too smart to take it because it doesn't pay well and it's like herding cats, except herding cats nationally. So that's a challenge we'll be facing. Some other challenges we've been dealing with the shutdown with state shellfish programs is currently the interstate certified shellfish shippers list is not being updated. And that's a problem in this last quarter of the year because in Massachusetts, we've had a couple of new firms come on, aquaculturists that have made that jump to being a grower dealer, and we're unable to list them. So this was an issue that came up at the executive board meeting, and myself and others, particularly in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic, had an informal discussion that we would agree to notify receiving states' shellfish control authorities if we had somebody new that qualified to be certified but couldn't get a certificate because of the shutdown. We'd reach out to the state control authority in that state and say, hey, listen, we've got somebody who, successfully passed an NSSP inspection and would like to ship into your state to these customers. And we're happy to provide you with an inspection report if requested. Hopefully that's an issue that will be alleviated soon.
And it also affects the ability just to put together the annual list of certified dealers, and that's what we're doing at Division of Food Protection right now. We're in the last quarter of the year, which means we're doing the recertification inspections and assembling the list of certified dealers for January 1st, 2026.
Question.
Sure.
So if you have a grower that did make that leap, I have at least one, do they just make that request to you to reach out?
Have them call me directly.
Okay.
Yep, and we'll do what we can.
Okay.
And the states have been receptive. Connecticut actually reached out to us and said, we've got a new firm that's come on. Their standardization officer, who I know really well. And so, this is part of the reciprocity in this program. FDA is still not providing technical assistance, and by that, I mean some of the stuff that they do normally, like if we request to have a shellfish inspector standardized, we request to have a lab go through a validation process, or, we want any kind of, training at the state level. They are continuing to address recalls and emergencies, so it's not completely silent. It hasn't really affected the peers. Division of Food Protection has a peer scheduled for the first week of February for our plant and shipping review. And then the ROM, I think, is tentatively scheduled for July, and that's the old Vibrio peer review. FDA is still providing scheduled training courses. So we haven't heard anything specifically about shellfish training, but in the manufactured food program, which is a large part of what DFP does, they are still providing training. Their in-person courses are still happening, and they're still doing their online virtual training. And these are courses that states need in order to participate in any of the contract programs. NESA 2026. So the current president is Bryant Lewis of Maine DMR. He is also my alternate on the executive board. It'll be held April 8th and 9th at the Harrisseekett Inn in Freeport, Maine. You can see the details, you can read the slide. They're currently requesting any agenda topics or speaker suggestions. I've heard a few things today in this room that may be good for the agenda. There is a room block reserved, and you might want to act quick if you're interested in going. I'm sure DMF will provide emails to everybody here as they come from the state of Maine. This is a really good venue. This is where the people that do the work that makes up the dialogue at the ISSC. This is where we gather, right? The boots on the ground, the people that are actually doing, the growing area surveys, the people that are doing the lab work, the folks that are doing the inspections of plants. And regionally, we, sort of sort out our business and agree on what issues are important to the regulatory region or the region. This is open participation to anyone who's interested, so you will see people from FDA, federal agencies, certainly state regulatory agencies within the region. Some from other regions also attend, and industry. Unfortunately, industry attendance is never really consistent. But I certainly encourage industry to be a participant. Dale, this might be a good forum for some of your concerns.
I'll be there.
And a great opportunity to meet, other folks who are affected by similar problems. So I can't emphasize how important this is to, sort of, informing us, the DMF folks and DPH folks who go to the ISSC. So that.
All right,
I'm done.
thank you, Eric. All right, we're coming to the end here. We've got upcoming meeting dates and future meeting agenda items. Wayne, is there any current thinking about the time and place in the next meeting?
Again, we've got March as a placeholder, but I've heard some, maybe try to meet sooner, potentially. I don't know, folks, what folks think.
Is the New Bedford area acceptable to the group? Because, I think we can probably get a very inexpensive or free room down there that has, lights and heat. Better, a lot of things, so it might be, yeah, no objections. Any public comments? Is there anybody who would like to speak from the public? Or, sorry. Don't see anyone. I do have one issue. I spoke to Bill Doyle during the break and he pointed out to me that because I am the chair of this as defined in the statute, if there's it's a position
Wow.
that the group wanted to take, and put it and write a letter, it's a little awkward if DMF is, or the director is doing that. Bill is a member of our Marine Fisheries Advisory Commission and, so he's appointed to this by virtue of his position on the commission. So that might be my suggestion, for one, to designate one of you to sort of prepare a letter, with his signature on behalf of a larger group, and we could even include a roster of who is in that group. And so, Bill, that sounds acceptable to you?
Yes, and this is in regards to the funding for the test.
Well, whatever the issue is.
Yeah.
I mean, if the group wants to take a position, I suggest that you take it and you funnel it through our representative of the Marine Fisheries Advisory Commission for, just for clarity and continuity. Everyone.
Have you gotten into trouble for these things before? I mean, how much communication can you have between all members of the group? Are you under the open meeting law here, or is it, not to ask for, I'm asking for.
Yeah.
If the group chat, in other words.
Well, no, what I'm suggesting is that at these meetings, if there's a position taken, and maybe, coming into the next meeting, if, like Dale had one. If the group wants to take a formal position on something, or generate some discussion, and like typically at our Marine Fisheries Advisory Commission meetings, in my conversation about law enforcement and the problem with the law enforcement budget, and the motion made to write a letter in support of law enforcement's budget and reports of that, and we help draft that, but it goes out under the chairman's signature, not the director's signature, so the chairman of our commission, right on Ray King. So all I'm saying is that.
I was just thinking, if we would communicate with them all of us individually and so on.
Yeah, I think
I'm just
my
thinking of-
suggestion is to have the discussions here,
Okay.
but funnel the communication through one of the members, and I'd like to I suggest designated the MFAC representative.
So if we're gonna meet the deadline for this budget for the funding for the modeling, we need to do that today. So we would need a motion from someone.
Yes. So this motion would, contain a request to, maintain that funding. And I think Dale, your point is you would like to see more funding for data collection to verify.
On the existing models.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which ties in, which we talked with Chrissy and you about the, 1 or 2 or 3 FTEs and a budget for the sampling for the short term, the immediate, just to keep that data collection going to support what Dale is saying, and then there's the annual budget, Dan, to make sure that we're maintaining the funding for the appropriate language for next year, right? FY 27.
Sure, I mean, representative isn't here, but if I had to prioritize, I'd prioritize those first two. And, we're pretty well staffed at this point in Shellfish. I think we can, oh, you talked about labs.
The lab is
Yeah,
additional
yeah.
sampling
Okay,
person.
So, given our current hiring freeze, without likelihood of seeing that get released in the near term, I would just be caution everyone to make the request to be maybe on the order of hiring consultants to do X, Y, Z.
Contract
probably
employees.
cost-
Yeah,
Contractors,
contract
X, Y, Z, or doesn't have to be our employee, that's what I'm saying.
Right,
Just
to get the work done.
ask to have the work done through some means, not necessarily staff or DMF, and it'll probably immediately fall flat on.
Right.
Face right now.
So what we would do is put together a request after we get the budget that you guys have ready together.
To have the work done, and then how that gets, who gets hired to do that, that's.
Right, right.
But there's 2 distinct items. One is a short-term request for our current operating time frame, right? And then the next would be for a future budget, not to get cut.
Yeah, to maintain the budget, given the value and importance of Shellfish in the eyes of this commission.
Yeah, I would argue that. Maybe it's unlikely that there will be an increase because of the projections and what the expectations are. But I think this group should be in a position to be as supportive as possible, and whether it's accepted or not, we can't make that prediction. So, you know, I would be more for not trying to stem losses, but make gains.
So I think well, I'll work with Bill, and Bill would send a draft out, and, you know, Ron's right, avoid any, you know, mass communications, but to communicate directly back to Bill with any comments.
So we could do it remotely, we don't have to do it while everybody's in person.
Can we make a motion, I think someone for level funding for this year?
So move. Yes.
Thanks, Sean.
With the, sort of describing what our critical needs are, right, the continued, the hydrodynamic modeling, the validation studies, and the necessary staff to complete all that work.
I'll include all of that in my motion.
Yeah, okay. Bradley, did you catch that?
So,
Okay.
yeah.
All right, so we'll work with Bill on that, and,
And we'll feed
Yeah.
information through Bill.
Yeah.
Should we need a second?
is there, yeah, I think we have.
need a second.
I think Bill's second and you seconded, you made a motion.
I don't think I can, I think Seth just seconded that.
All right. Any objections to the motion?
I'm gonna abstain.
Okay, I was gonna get to that next. Any abstentions? Okay, one abstention. All right. Okay, so, I think that's the complete agenda. I thought this was a really productive meeting. Always is. I think the DMF Shellfish staff are doing some excellent work, and I know a lot of you are really impressed with the level of attention and the hard work. I understand even Mac Misa is spending his nights at the end of an outfall pipe to get the most accurate data he can. Either we're doing a study as to whether or not the CSOs have kind of a sustained level of contamination, or does that change over the event timeframe? And anyway, stuff like that.
He's looking for an armed bodyguard to go with him this year.
Sure.
But yeah, budget request.
But so, you know, Chrissy and Alex and Matt and, you know, I think DMF Shellfish has never been in a stronger position, so. And this group, really, from my mind, is sort of designed to, you know, ground truth a lot of what we do, give us the positive and sometimes negative feedback to make the program better, so thank you for all that you do to give us that feedback.
And Dan, thank you for coming to Friday to commemorate the recognition of November as aquaculture.
Yes,
And I don't know who phrased the proclamation, but it really covers it.
yeah, it's good,
It was a good wordsmith.
yeah. Anyway, that was a good event. I never saw the Boston Public Library before, or if I seen it, I haven't gone through it. Wow, what an impressive building. It's fantastic. All right.
Can we have a motion to adjourn?
Certainly. Thank you.
All right.
They're all.
Yeah.
Just.